In this video, we're breaking down 2 hours of disturbing regular show episodes you can fall asleep to. Let's get started. First up, we got Rigby's Body, Season 1, Episode 11. Rigby's Body stands out as one of regular show's most disturbing episodes because it takes a simple argument about junk food and transforms it into body horror. The episode aired during Season 1 and shows what happens when Rigby refuses to listen to Mordecai's warnings about eating too much garbage. The result is genuinely unsettling, with Rigby's physical body literally rejecting him and walking away, leaving him as a green blob of consciousness trapped in a bucket. The episode starts with Mordecai and Rigby working at the park's snack bar. Mordecai is bored out of his mind and immediately complains that this is the worst job at the park. He's frustrated because Rigby picked this assignment for them, and Mordecai thinks the whole thing sucks. Rigby defends his choice by claiming the snack bar is the funniest job at the park, but Mordecai calls him out. He tells Rigby that he's only saying that because he doesn't want to admit he made a bad decision. The two start arguing, with Mordecai saying working the snack bar is more boring than watching Rigby try to read a children's book. Rigby fires back, asking if it's more boring than Mordecai's face. Things escalate quickly, with both of them threatening to punch each other in the face and calling each other turds. They actually start physically fighting when Pops walks in and breaks it up. Pops tells them they can all be turds, which somehow diffuses the situation. When Pops asks how they like being guardians of the snacks, Rigby says it's awesome, while Mordecai says the place is lame. They start fighting again until Pops drops a crucial piece of information. He tells them that when he works at the snack bar, all the snacks are free. The moment Pops walks away, Mordecai and Rigby look at each other and immediately duck under the counter, shoveling donuts into their mouths as fast as they can. The episode then shows a montage of Mordecai and Rigby eating every snack they can get their hands on. They're consuming donuts, candy, chips, and whatever else they can find. By the end of the montage, the snack bar is completely trashed and both of them are sick from eating way too much. Mordecai realizes he needs to eat something healthy like a salad. Rigby's response reveals how deep his stubbornness goes. He stops himself from throwing up and insists that if they keep eating, they'll feel better in no time. Mordecai questions this logic, asking if Rigby seriously believes eating more will make them feel better. He tells Rigby to quit being a loser. Rigby takes offense to being called a loser and refuses to listen to the guy who was wrong about the snack bar being cool. He says he'd rather listen to the guy who's right all the time, which, according to him, is himself. To prove his point, Rigby picks up a fried soda cup and actually takes a bite out of it. Mordecai is disgusted, and Rigby grimaces in pain as his stomach rumbles. The scene transitions to nighttime at the house. Mordecai is eating a salad and feels much better. Rigby is standing next to a blender filled with a donut, candy, and other junk food. He grinds all of it into goop and drinks it, grimacing in pain again as his stomach rumbles. Mordecai warns him that if he keeps eating like this, his body is going to quit on him. Rigby tells him to stop talking. Mordecai says he's just trying to help and walks out of the kitchen. Rigby mutters that he showed Mordecai and puts another donut in his mouth. A split second later, he's rolling on the floor groaning in pain and asking why more food isn't working. He screams in pain and picks up the donut next to him, saying one more should do it. That's when things get disturbing. Rigby suddenly drops the donut as he loses control of his hands. His hands grab his face, pull him to his feet, and drag him around the room. He smashes into a wall and falls over a chair. His hands keep pulling really hard, causing his eyes to roll back into his head and glow. Rigby asks what his hands are doing, but they keep pulling until they eject him as a green glob of consciousness with just his eyes visible. Rigby tells his body to let him back in, but his body pushes him away and runs off. He tries to follow, but ends up inside a bucket on the floor. His response to this horrifying situation is to say whatever, and that he's just going to chill in the bucket. The next morning, Mordecai enters the kitchen, and Rigby calls out to him from the bucket. When Mordecai sees Rigby as a green glob, he recoils in disgust and asks what the heck that is. Rigby laughs and asks who the loser is now. Mordecai realizes it's Rigby and can't believe what he's seeing. Rigby says he was right because his stomach doesn't even hurt anymore. Mordecai points out that's because Rigby doesn't even have a body anymore, and this is really bad. Rigby thinks it's bad like good and asks Mordecai to shovel some cheese curls into his trash hole. Mordecai sighs, picks up the bucket, and tells Rigby he better hope Skips knows how to fix this. At Skip's house, Skips asks what happened to Rigby's body. Mordecai explains that he doesn't know, but it ditched Rigby or something from eating too much junk food. Skip says it looks like it's not that big of a deal if Rigby doesn't mind being a bodiless consciousness for the rest of his life. Rigby says it's cool and he doesn't mind. Mordecai refuses to accept this and tells Rigby to quit being a loser. Rigby starts to argue that being right doesn't make him a loser, but Mordecai puts a lid on the bucket and asks Skips what they have to do. He says he can't let Rigby stay like this. Skips explains that once the body departs, they only have until sunset to get it back. When Mordecai says he doesn't know where the body is, Skips says they have to find it. Mordecai and Skips leave in the cart, telling Rigby to stay put. Rigby asks where they're going and requests cheese curls again, but they're already gone. The episode shows Rigby's body eating a salad in Long Park, looking both ways to make sure no one sees him. Back at Skip's house, Rigby is trying to move the bucket with all his might. He's grunting and struggling because it's much harder to move around without his body. He sees a hockey stick and roller skates and comes up with an idea. He straps the hockey stick to the roller skates and his bucket, creating a makeshift mobile unit. Meanwhile, Mordecai and Skips sneak behind a bush and hear Rigby's body chewing salad. Skips parts the bushes and Mordecai asks what it's doing. Skips says it's eating a salad and tells Mordecai to rush the body on the count of 3. They're counting when Rigby wheels in loudly on his new contraption, asking what's up. Rigby's body hears this, stops eating, and runs away. Mordecai and Swips are frustrated. Skips points at Rigby and reminds him they told him to stay put. Mordecai tells Rigby he scared the body away. Rigby says not to worry because he was right about not needing his body. He shows off his trash can and rollerblade setup. Mordecai can't believe what he's seeing and tells Rigby to please just stay put. Rigby says all this being right is making him hungry. At the snack bar, Muscle Man and High Five Ghost are working behind the counter. Muscle Man complains that this sucks when he sees Rigby skating toward them in the bucket. Rigby slams the door open and demands snacks. High Five Ghost asks what he is, terrified. Muscle Man says it looks like a bucket of diarrhea. Rigby tells them it's him, but Muscle Man is terrified and thinks the boot with wheels stole Rigby's voice. Rigby says he didn't steal anything. Muscle Man tells High Five Ghost they need to bail because the boot isn't stealing their voices. They climb out and run away. Rigby chases them, but trips on a rock. Back in the park, Skips picks up the eaten salad and sniffs it. He says the body is close and he'll take care of it while Mordecai finds Rigby. They don't have much time. The sun is shown over the building as Mordecai searches for Rigby at the snack bar. Muscle Man and High Five Ghost show up armed with a bat and brass knuckles. When Mordecai asks if they've seen Rigby, Muscle Man asks if Mordecai has seen a magic garbage can because they need to beat it. Mordecai realizes the magic garbage can was Rigby and asks which way he went. They hear Rigby screaming. A trash collector is dumping Rigby into a garbage truck and throws the skate can back on the ground. Mordecai gasps and the truck pulls away with Rigby inside. Inside the filthy, roach-infested truck, Rigby is recoiling and squealing in horror. A voice tells him no one can hear him. Rigby asks who's there. The voice identifies itself as another bodiless consciousness and asks if Rigby worked out way too hard. Rigby says no, he ate too much junk food. The bodybuilder says that'll do it and explains he was a bodybuilder who could have gone pro. The episode shows a flashback of a huge muscular man lifting weights at a gym. The bodybuilder says his friend kept telling him that if he kept pumping iron like that, his body would quit on him. He told his friend he was full of it, but he didn't get his body back in time and now he's stuck with a basketball for a body. Rigby says his body is still good. The bodybuilder asks what Rigby is doing in the truck if his body is still good and calls him a dummy. He says Rigby must not want it and asks if he can take it. Rigby says no. The basketball bounces away with the bodybuilder saying he'll find the body and calling Rigby a sucker. Rigby falls over crying when the trash door opens and Mordecai appears. Rigby admits Mordecai was right and he was wrong. He's crying and apologizes for being such a loser, begging Mordecai to help him get his body back. Mordecai says not to worry because they can get it back in time. He adds that even if they mess up, Rigby always has the skate can. They both say their catchphrase, but Rigby says seriously he wants his old body back. Mordecai radios Skips that he found Rigby. Skips responds through the radio that he found the body, but they better hurry because they have a problem. The scene cuts to the park where Rigby's body is wearing a bodybuilding outfit and limbering up to lift a dumbbell. The body tries to lift it but immediately drops the weight. The bodybuilder's essence morphs out of Rigby's body and angrily calls the body worthless, slapping it. He says he can't believe the body can't do a simple clean and jerk. Mordecai and Skips appear behind Rigby's body, with Mordecai holding the trash can. Rigby asks what the bodybuilder is doing with his body. The bodybuilder morphs back into Rigby's body and asks what Rigby thinks, saying it's pretty cool. Rigby says no, it's not pretty cool because the bodybuilder dresses him like a loser. The bodybuilder flexes and says Rigby doesn't like weightlifting singlets, adding that's no wonder his body left him. He tells Rigby the body isn't his anymore, it's the bodybuilder's now. Rigby demands his body back. The bodybuilder says finders keepers. Skips says they tried the nice way, and now they'll do it the Skips way. His nipples glitter and thump. The bodybuilder looks nervous, throws his singlet at Mordecai, and runs away. Mordecai, Rigby, and Skips chase the bodybuilder through the park. The bodybuilder sprints onto the road and knocks over a cyclist. Skips says he's too fast. Pops pulls up in a golf cart asking if they're having a game of tag. Skips wishes Pops wouldn't teach Mordecai and Rigby those words. Skips and Mordecai jump into the cart with Rigby. Skips takes the wheel and the chase continues up and down the park hill. Rigby says he'll take it from here and dives from the cart before Mordecai can grab him. Mordecai yells for him to stop. Rigby and his body are shown tumbling down the side of the switchback road while the cart continues on the pavement. Skips says it's too steep and they'll have to go around. Further down the road, Rigby and his body emerge from the bushes, still fighting. Rigby tells the bodybuilder to give him his body back. The bodybuilder tells him to get off. Rigby manages to crawl back into his body and tells the bodybuilder to get out of his body. The two essences pop out of Rigby's chest and continue wrestling. The bodybuilder throws Rigby's essence at the cart, hitting Skips in the face. Skips swerves and blindly runs into Rigby's body, sending the bodybuilder's essence flying to a nearby playground. He lands on a slide and becomes one with it. A fat kid slides down and walks away from the slide. The bodybuilder complains that his mouth was open. Back at the cart, the four park workers look at Rigby's body on the road. It has a tire track right across its back. Rigby says they did it and he got his body back. Mordecai moans in disgust and asks if Rigby is sure he still wants it. The camera zooms in on the body, showing it even more mangled with flies buzzing around it. Rigby picks up the body and its arms hang limp and broken. He says he'll never treat his body like that again. Skips tells him to hurry before the sun sets. As Rigby watches the sunset, he dives into his body, which shoots out white light in beautiful rays. Pops' eyes are wide in wonder as he says it's glorious. The white light stops, and Rigby's eyes roll forward in his head. He blinks in recognition. Mordecai leans over him and puts a hand on his belly, asking how he feels. Rigby responds by screaming. The scene cuts to the snack bar, where Rigby is wrapped almost entirely in plaster and sitting in a wheelchair with bleary eyes. Rigby tells Mordecai that he guesses Mordecai was right about the snack bar being lame, especially now that they're not into eating all the free snacks. Mordecai says about that, and reveals those snacks weren't actually free. Rigby asks what he means. Mordecai explains that it turns out only Pops gets snacks for free. Rigby whines Pops' name pitifully. Mordecai says they're supposed to work at the snack bar for the next 6 months just to pay for all the snacks they ate. Rigby says turds and the episode ends. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Elo Governor, Season 2, Episode 1. Elo Governor is disturbing because it takes a simple horror movie rental and turns it into psychological terror that feels like it jumps out of the screen and into reality. The episode aired during Season 2 and shows what happens when Rigby refuses to admit he made a mistake renting a scary movie. What starts as Mordecai complaining about having to watch another horror film turns into genuine nightmare fuel when the movie's villain appears to come to life and hunt Rigby down in the real world. The episode begins at the Movie Shack hut, where an employee is dancing in front of the store wearing a costume depicting King Kong climbing the Empire State Building. Rigby rushes out of the store carrying a movie case and bumps into the employee. The employee apologizes and Rigby chuckles and says, "Nice outfit," before running off. The employee yells after him that it's a costume and they make him wear it. This opening scene establishes the video store employee who will become crucial to the episode's twist ending, though viewers watching for the first time have no idea how important this character actually is. The scene cuts to the house at nighttime where Mordecai and Rigby are ready to watch a movie. Mordecai announces it's movie night and holds up a bowl of popcorn. Rigby holds up the movie case showing only the back cover and says he got the movie. Mordecai stops him because he thought they were watching Shy Guy. He holds up a movie case with a pink front cover that has a big red heart in the middle. Rigby tells him he's seen that movie 100 times and that he got something better. He reveals the movie case to Mordecai. The movie is called "Hello, Governor," and has a picture of a British taxi with sharp teeth on the front cover. Mordecai repeats the title questioningly. Rigby says it's foreign and reads from the back cover. The description says, "A British taxi is possessed by the soul of its driver, seeking revenge on the gang members who murdered him," ending with the tagline, "To pay the fare or pay the price." Rigby pops his head from behind the movie case when delivering the tagline. Mordecai immediately shuts down the idea, saying, "Not another horror movie." He reminds Rigby that last time he had to walk him to the bathroom every night for a week. Rigby insists this time will be different because this one is old and cheesy, claiming it will be hilarious. Mordecai asks if Rigby is sure he can handle it. Rigby points out the movie is in black and white. Mordecai reluctantly agrees. Rigby opens the case and Mordecai turns off the lights. Rigby puts the tape into the VCR, and the movie begins playing with ominous music. The title card reads, "Hello, Governor," with a copyright date of 1982 shown in Roman numerals. Mordecai and Rigby do fake screaming, but laugh pretty quickly afterwards. Rigby asks if this is fun, and Mordecai responds with an unenthusiastic noise. The actual movie plays in black and white. It starts at a boarding school where a boy sits quietly in a classroom. He opens his composition notebook to see a tire tread engraved in it. He gasps and looks out the window to see a British taxi. The taxi says, "Hello, Governor," and drives into the window, running the boy over off-screen. Mordecai chuckles, but Rigby looks traumatized. The next scene shows a woman in her bathroom combing her hair. She closes the cabinet, and in the mirror, the taxi appears behind the shower curtain. The taxi says, "Hello, Governor." She turns around and sees the British taxi come out of her shower, and it runs her over off-screen. Mordecai yawns in boredom while Rigby is scared and holding a pillow. In the movie, an old man is walking his dog and hears the taxi's engine revving. The taxi is standing behind him and says, "Hello, Governor." The old man tries to run away but gets hit. Rigby watches in horror as the taxi eats the old man. Rigby is sweating hard. The taxi says, "Hello, Governor," again, and spits out some of the old man's bones from its exhaust pipe before killing more people off-screen. The taxi keeps saying, "Hello, Governor," as more screaming occurs before the movie ends and the screen goes to static. Mordecai snores before immediately waking up. He asks if it's over, turns off the TV and rubs his eyes. He tells Rigby that was so cheesy and questions what was up with the taxi, asking if it was supposed to be evil or normal but haunted by a ghost controlling it. Rigby looks completely freaked out by the movie. The scene fades to their bedroom where Mordecai is peacefully asleep while Rigby is trying to go to sleep. Rigby gets up and looks at the window. He sees no taxi at first, but when he looks at the same spot again, the taxi is there. Rigby calls for Mordecai, but Mordecai is still asleep. Rigby turns around and sees the British taxi right by his window. He screams and runs to Mordecai, shaking him and telling him to wake up. Mordecai speaks in the British taxi's voice, saying, "Hello, Governor." He turns around to show that his eyes were replaced with car headlights. Rigby screams and steps back. Mordecai sits up, and the British taxi comes out of his body and drives towards Rigby before his nightmare ends. Rigby wakes up screaming until he gets hit by a pillow thrown by Mordecai. Mordecai tells him to chill out and that he's screaming like a maniac. Rigby says he keeps having nightmares. Mordecai tells him to just dream about something else then, and to dream like he's a tough guy or something. Mordecai lies back down. Rigby tries to sleep while saying he's a tough guy repeatedly. In his dream, he's a tough guy named Fists, walking down the street at nighttime. Fists narrates that they say this city is tough, but he's tougher. He walks into a dark alley and a gangster with half his hair shaved off follows him with a knife. The gangster tells him he walked down the wrong alley and calls him Riggerson. Fists pins him against the wall and says the names Fists while pulling his fist back. He's about to punch the gangster when the British taxi comes and shines its headlights on both of them. The taxi says, "Hello, governor!" Fists gasps before the taxi drives into him. Rigby wakes up screaming from his second nightmare. Mordecai sits up angry and asks, "What the heck?" Rigby says it's that stupid British taxi and that it's all up inside his brain. Mordecai groans and says he knew it, that he knew this would happen, and that he told Rigby they shouldn't have watched that movie. Rigby apologizes and says he can't help it. Mordecai sighs and says they'll just desensitize Rigby to the horror by watching "Hello, Governor" over and over again until he stops being scared. Rigby gets scared. The scene cuts to the living room where Mordecai is holding Rigby to the TV, which is paused on a frame of "Hello, Governor." Mordecai yells at Rigby to look at it. Rigby tells him to let him go. Mordecai says it's not real and that you can see the microphone showing. A boom mic is visible on the frame. Mordecai tells Rigby to look at it. Rigby tells him to get off. Mordecai says he's sick of Rigby keeping him up and tells him to look at it. Rigby tells him to let him go. The scene fades to daytime with Mordecai still telling Rigby to look at it and Rigby still telling him to let him go. It fades back to nighttime with both of them tired. Mordecai slowly tells Rigby to look at it. The scene fades back to daytime with both of them exhausted. Rigby breaks free and gets the movie out of the VCR. He throws it against the wall as Benson comes into the room asking what the heck is going on. Mordecai pushes Rigby and says Rigby is just freaked out by this dumb British movie they watched. Benson says they better have this mess cleaned up by the time he gets back from his cricket game. Mordecai questions cricket. Benson says he's trying new things and asks, "So what?" Mordecai gasps and asks if British people will be there. Benson responds that it's cricket, so what does Mordecai think? The scene cuts to a cricket match where British people are present. Mordecai tells Rigby there's nothing to be afraid of and asks him to see how calm and collected these British dudes are. British people walk up to them saying, "Hello, governor," repeatedly. Rigby gets scared by their greetings. The British people look evil for some reason. Suddenly, the British taxi appears and says, "Hello, governor." Rigby screams and runs away. Mordecai calls after him repeatedly. Rigby is still running towards the house. Pops and Skips walk up to Mordecai. Mordecai says he knew they shouldn't have watched that lame car movie. Skips asks if Rigby is scared of cars now. Mordecai says no, just British taxis. Pops says what a silly notion because his British taxi is not scary at all. Mordecai asks if Pops owns a British taxi. Pops confirms yes. A clock transition shows Mordecai, Rigby, and Pops entering a barn. Rigby asks, "What's in the barn?" Mordecai says something that will get rid of Rigby's fear. Pops opens the barn doors, revealing a yellow taxi standing alone inside. Pops says there she is and asks if she's a beauty. Mordecai asks what the heck and says he thought Pops said he had a British taxi. Pops says he thought Mordecai said a brownish taxi. Mordecai points out that taxi is yellow. Pops responds that his taxi is no coward and he guarantees that. Mordecai sighs and says, "Never mind." He and Pops get ready to enter the taxi, and Mordecai asks Rigby if he's ready to go for a ride. Rigby refuses, saying, "No way to getting in that thing." Mordecai says it's not even a British taxi. Rigby says he doesn't care because a taxi is a taxi. Mordecai says it will be fun, and they'll just go for a little ride. Rigby says he has to go to the bathroom. The scene cuts to the bathroom where Rigby washes his hands and pulls the toilet paper to see a tire tread. Rigby is shocked as lightning strikes nearby. Rigby looks up to the mirror and notices the British taxi. The taxi says, "Hello, governor." Rigby gasps and runs out of the bathroom. He goes into a dark office and pants as he stands by the door. The phone rings and Rigby grabs it to hear who's on the other end. The British taxi says, "Hello, governor," over the phone. Rigby gasps and throws the phone to the ground. He turns to the sound of a fax machine printing out the words, "Hello, governor." Rigby screams and runs out of the office, deciding to go with Mordecai and Pops. Rigby tells them to go and drive as he gets in the taxi. Pops drives out of the barn. Mordecai asks what it is. Rigby says that British taxi is following him. Mordecai tells him he's just seeing things. Rigby insists it was the British taxi and it was real. Mordecai asks if it came out of the movie then. Rigby says he doesn't know, maybe. Mordecai says fine, Rigby is safe now anyways, so they should try to relax and calm down while Pops drives them around for a bit. The scene fades to some time later with Pops driving to the woods. Mordecai has fallen asleep, but Pops, although tired, keeps driving. Rigby asks where they're going. Pops says he always drives deep into the woods when he wants to clear his mind and asks if Rigby loves the scenery. Rigby looks out the window at the trees, which all have evil faces on them. This scares Rigby and leaves him panting against the seat. He looks out the window again to see the British taxi. Rigby gasps and looks at the back window to see it driving closer and closer to Pop's taxi. He whimpers as Pop's taxi suddenly stops. Pop says, "Oh bother." Rigby asks what's happening and why they're stopping. Pop says it seems they've run out of gasoline. Rigby panics, saying this is not good because the taxi is coming and they're stuck there. He calls for Mordecai. Mordecai wakes up screaming and asking what it is. Rigby says they ran out of gas and the taxi is coming for him. He ducks to the bottom of the taxi. Mordecai tells Pops they have to get out and push, then tells Rigby to come on. Rigby refuses to go out there. Mordecai says fine. He and Pops will push Rigby all the way home then. Mordecai and Pops come out of the taxi and start pushing it back home. Rigby tells them not to go back that way. He notices headlights of a car shining in the distance and gasps. A car is approaching them. Rigby panics repeatedly, saying no. Mordecai and Pops both notice the car's headlights getting brighter. Mordecai says all right and calls for help. Rigby gets out of the taxi screaming and runs away. Mordecai calls after him and looks back to realize the car approaching them is actually a British taxi. The British taxi says, "Hello, governor." Mordecai yells that it's real and tells Pops to run. Mordecai and Pops run away. The British taxi runs over Pop's taxi, shattering it to pieces. Rigby is still running with Mordecai and Pops following him. The British taxi is still chasing all three. They all jump over a log, but the British taxi keeps driving and runs over the log. Mordecai tells Pops to look out and grabs him in the nick of time. The British taxi continues driving into the woods. Mordecai realizes it's going after Rigby and says they have to help him. Pops puts his top hat back on. Mordecai and Pops call for Rigby. Rigby is still running. His tail touches the British taxi's grill, almost running him over. Rigby sprints and ends up in a dead end. The British taxi drives up and corners Rigby, leading him to lean against a tree. The taxi says, "Hello, governor." Rigby screams. Mordecai calls for Rigby. Mordecai and Pops get hit by the British taxi's doors, knocking them out unconscious. The British taxi says, "Hello, governor," again. Rigby yells that he's no governor. Rigby tries to run away but bumps into a tree. The British taxi laughs maniacally. Rigby opens his eyes and sees the British taxi trying to run him over. The taxi says, "Hello, governor." Rigby gets up to face the taxi. Rigby becomes furious and yells that his name is Fists. He smashes the British taxi's headlights and tells it to leave him alone. He punches the British taxi's front bumper and kicks its grille while saying he hates it. He pulls off its left door, bites off the taxi sign, and pulls off the British taxi's roof. Then he walks off screen and smashes a tree on top of the damaged British taxi while telling it to stop following him around. The scene cuts to Mordecai and Pops holding Rigby down. Rigby is squirming. Mordecai tells him to wake up and to stop it. Rigby says, "Stop," and then asks if that's Mordecai. Pops says, "Thank goodness Rigby is all right." Rigby says he did it and conquered his fear, claiming he cleaned that taxi's clock with his fists. Mordecai says kind of, explaining that Rigby hit his head and started going psycho on the taxi, but actually the taxi was a kid. The British taxi unfolds itself to reveal it was actually the employee from the Movie Shack hut in a costume. Rigby recognizes him. The employee asks what Rigby's problem is. Rigby asks why the employee was following him in that taxi suit. The employee sighs and holds up a paper, explaining his boss made him wear this, and that he's from the video store. The rental is overdue. Mordecai asks why the employee didn't just call or something. The employee says he did and he sent a fax. Rigby asks if that was him. The employee confirms yes and asks if Rigby can just return the video, please. Rigby says they broke it. The employee says Rigby will have to pay for it. Mordecai and Rigby both turn to Pops. Pops says, of course, and that the smallest bill he has is $100, asking if that will do. The employee says, "Yeah, sure." Pops hands him a lollipop. The employee asks if this is some kind of joke and sees Mordecai and Rigby carrying Pops away. He says he has to get a better job. The scene cuts to the house with Mordecai and Rigby in bed. Rigby calls for Mordecai. Mordecai groans, thinking it's happening again. Rigby tells him not to worry because he's not scared again. He thanks Mordecai for helping him out with his fears and stuff. Mordecai says, "No problem," and tells Rigby goodnight. Rigby says goodnight back. The scene transitions to Rigby's dream where he's in his Fists persona driving a car. Fists narrates that they say, "This city is pretty tough, but he's tougher." The camera shows he's actually driving a British taxi that is flying in the night sky. The British taxi flies off towards the moon where the license plate reads Fists before the camera fades to black. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Jinx, Season 2, Episode 16. Jinx is disturbing because it takes a simple childhood game and transforms it into a nightmare scenario where an evil demon version of Rigby emerges from a mirror and transforms everyone in the park into werewolf monsters. The episode aired during Season 2 and shows how a harmless Jinx game spirals into physical abuse and eventually unleashes supernatural horror that threatens to destroy everyone Rigby knows. What makes this episode particularly unsettling is how it combines everyday playground cruelty with genuine body horror and demonic possession. The episode begins on a lovely day at the park where Mordecai and Rigby are picking up trash. Mordecai complains about how lazy people are when there are trash cans everywhere. Rigby suggests maybe people didn't see them. Mordecai asks if Rigby is defending these people and if he enjoys being stuck cleaning all this up. Rigby says yeah, because he found some things. He holds up tiny bronze-colored shoes. Mordecai asks what Rigby is going to do with bronze baby shoes. Rigby says he doesn't know, but he'll think of something. Mordecai asks if Rigby is just filling his bag with cool stuff he finds. Rigby confirms, yeah, and explains, people leave all sorts of junk and you just have to look. Mordecai realizes he didn't even think to look and that all he got is trash. He dumps his trash onto the ground. Mordecai then sees a plastic army figure on the ground and picks it up with his stick. He celebrates and holds up the army dude. Rigby says it's true what they say, that one man's trash is another man's pleasure. Mordecai corrects him that it's treasure, not pleasure, and that saying pleasure is just weird. Rigby argues it's a pleasure to find treasure, so same difference. Mordecai says whatever. Mordecai and Rigby realize there's a quarter on the ground. They hear its jingle before both gasping and saying quarter simultaneously. Mordecai says, "Jinx!" Rigby picks up the quarter, saying this treasure is his pleasure. Mordecai punches Rigby in the arm. Rigby protests and Mordecai does another punch. Mordecai says he said jinx and that Rigby is jinxed. Rigby says fine and offers Mordecai the quarter. Another punch lands. Rigby starts to complain, but Mordecai raises his fist so Rigby quickly covers his mouth. Mordecai explains, Rigby knows how this works and that you can't talk when you're jinxed. If you talk, you're going to get punched. He tells Rigby to keep his mouth shut. Rigby says fine and gets punched again. He yells that it hurts. A clock transition shows a montage of the game continuing. Mordecai and Rigby are playing a video game and Rigby succeeds. He celebrates, saying it's in Mordecai's face. Mordecai punches Rigby once more and goes back to playing. The scene cuts to Mordecai and Rigby wearing sunglasses. Mordecai points out something and tells Rigby to look. A solar eclipse is occurring. Rigby says that's amazing. Another punch sends Rigby to the ground, but he continues watching the moon cover the sun entirely. He says it's so beautiful and gets another punch. He yells that it hurts. The scene cuts to Rigby in the bedroom reading a book. Mordecai enters with an open box and tells Rigby to check out what came for him in the mail. Rigby runs over asking what it is. It's a sucker punch from Mordecai right through the box. Rigby's responses continue getting him punched. He says totally, gets punched. Says nice, gets punched. Says come on, gets punched. Asks if Mordecai can pass something and gets punched again, knocking his bowl of cereal over. Rigby yells and angrily slams the table. He stands up about to yell something but catches himself. Mordecai asks what it is and says Rigby can tell him anything. Rigby growls and sits back down. Mordecai tells Rigby he knows he can just break the jinx by having someone say his name 3 times. Rigby seems surprised. Mordecai asks if he didn't tell Rigby that. Rigby's surprise turns to anger. Mordecai says he guesses he didn't because everybody knows that. He was wondering why Rigby didn't break it sooner. Rigby runs off. Mordecai warns him to keep his mouth shut because he'll be listening. The scene cuts to an annoyed Benson observing the still-present trash on the ground. Benson complains that of course all this trash would still be here and asks why he even tries. He hears Rigby's footsteps and tells him to get over there right now. Rigby thinks he's found a getaway and runs up to Benson, saying his name and that he needs him. Benson tells him to stop and not say anything. He points out the trash, asking what this is and if they expect him to let this slide. Rigby says no, yes, he doesn't know, and that he just needs Benson to do something. Benson says what Rigby needs, but what Benson needs is for Rigby to start cleaning this up right now or he's fired. Rigby says okay, he's doing it, but asks if Benson can just say his name 3 times. Rigby sees Mordecai behind a tree. Benson asks what and why Rigby wants him to say his name. Mordecai raises his fist. Benson turns to see Mordecai and asks what he's looking at. He sees Mordecai, who runs away. Benson asks if that's Mordecai and tries to get his attention, yelling for Mordecai to get over there this second or he's fired. Rigby throws a can of soda at Benson's head to get his attention. Benson asks what the heck and what's the matter with Rigby? Seeing the open door, Rigby throws another can of soda at Benson. Benson yells again and Rigby throws the rest of the trash. Benson then throws a temper tantrum. Screaming, he pounds the ground, then goes over to the cart, throws a can of compost up into the air, and when it falls, he kicks it while still screaming. Rigby looks on and says to just say his name one more time. Rigby sees Mordecai next to him, who makes sounds and punches him again. The scene changes to the park water fountain where Pops is looking at his reflection in the water and laughing. Rigby appears and shakes Pops. Pops greets him. Rigby tries to tell Pops he's jinxed, but he can't talk, so he tries charades. Pops gasps and asks if they're playing charades, calling it good show and saying he adores parlor games. He mentions they can play bits and bobbles next. Rigby grunts. Pops says he's getting ahead of himself and tells Rigby to go. Rigby points to Pops and pats his chest. Pops guesses, friends till the end. He gets it wrong and Rigby does it again. Pops says, dirty raccoon. Rigby grunts, then points to 3 of his fingers and pats his chest. Pops guesses, 3 dirty raccoons. Rigby grunts and holds up 3 fingers. Pops says, raccoons' brains are 3 times smaller than normal. Rigby gets mad and holds up 3 fingers, shaking his wrist. Pops says no, and guesses 3 out of 3 raccoons can't read. Rigby groans as Mordecai walks up. Pops asks if Mordecai has come to play charades with them. Mordecai says, not if this guy is giving the clues because he blows at this game. Pops is never going to get it. No offense to Pops. Pops says, none taken, and agrees Rigby is terrible. Rigby growls and yells, shut up, saying he's good. Mordecai punches Rigby. Pops realizes he's jinxed. Mordecai laughs, saying yes, and that Pops got it. Pops says he loves a good jinxing. Rigby groans and runs to Skip's house. He opens the door and rungs to a meditating Skips. Skips asks what Rigby wants because he's in the middle of something. Rigby grabs a piece of paper, writes on it, and shows Skips the paper, which says he's jinxed and to say his name 3 times. Skips says, for some people, writing is talking, so Rigby is kind of breaking the rules. Skips punches Rigby. Rigby complains he didn't even say anything and gets punched by Mordecai. Mordecai says that's what he gets for cheating. Skips asks if sounds count too. Mordecai says sounds totally count. Rigby asks if sounds count. Skips and Mordecai punch Rigby with both fists. Rigby whines and runs away while Mordecai and Skips laugh. Mordecai asks if Skips wants to follow him. Skips says, yeah, why not? He's not doing anything right now. Skips gets up and they walk towards the door. The scene changes to Rigby running to look for someone to unjinx him. He says he's got to find somebody. He sees High Five Ghost coming the other way and stops. Rigby calls for Five, saying he's got to help him and say his name 3 times. High Five Ghost looks at him unhappily without saying anything. Rigby explains he's jinxed and Mordecai is taking this way too far, asking High Five to say his name 3 times. High Five shakes his head no. Rigby begs, come on. High Five Ghost is still shaking his head no. Rigby whines, asking why not? High Five Ghost says because he's jinxed too. Muscle Man comes out from the bushes and punches Fives to the ground. Muscle Man says, no talking while you're jinxed, loser. High Five Ghost weakly asks for help. Muscle Man punches High Five Ghost and tells him to shut his mouth. Rigby says High Five Ghost's name 3 times. Muscle Man protests. High Five Ghost gets up and laughs in celebration. Rigby asks High Five to help him back. High Five Ghost leaves without noticing Rigby and forgot to unjinx him. Rigby says, no, wait! Muscle Man asks why Rigby did that. Rigby apologizes, saying he just needed to get rid of his jinx. Muscle Man asks why Rigby doesn't take it off himself. Rigby asks if you can do that. Muscle Man says, yeah, it's easy. Muscle Man starts whispering something to Rigby. Rigby runs away and Muscle Man laughs. Mordecai asks Muscle Man if he's seen Rigby. Muscle Man says yeah, and that he just told that loser how to unjinx himself. Skips asks if Muscle Man told Rigby about the mirror thing. Muscle Man confirms he did, and that Rigby is just going to be talking to himself in the dark, saying it will be hilarious. Muscle Man laughs. Skip says they have to stop him. Rigby is seen running towards the men's bathroom. When he gets there, he locks the door, turns off the light, walks to the mirror, and turns the hot water on all of the sinks, causing the mirror to fog up. He's about to write on the mirror when he hears Mordecai knocking on the door. Mordecai tells him to open up and let them in. Rigby says no way because they're just going to hit him again. Mordecai says they won't and swears. He tells Rigby to just come out and they'll break the jinx. Rigby says to just break it now then. Skips says that's not how it works and it's got to happen face to face. Rigby groans and walks back to the mirror. Mordecai says no, and that Muscle Man doesn't know what he's talking about. He tells Rigby to come out of there, calling him an idiot and saying his name. Ignoring Mordecai's knocking, Rigby continues to write his name on the mirror and sees that everything he writes on the mirror becomes backwards above it. Rigby says, "Whoa!" and writes the rest of his name, standing back and saying, "Rigby." Lightning is heard, and a dark figure is seen in the mirror. Rigby says Rigby again. Lightning is heard again, and the dark figure is seen again. Rigby says Rigby a third time. Purple eyes are seen on the dark figure, and Yibgear comes out of the mirror trying to scratch Rigby. Rigby avoids the attack and runs to the sinks, panting. Yibgear growls, making Rigby scream. Yibgear attacks again, disconnecting a sink from the wall as Rigby runs into a stall. In it, a man is seen reading on the toilet. The man asks if Rigby minds because he's trying to get some reading done. Rigby gets out of the stall, sees Yibgear, and runs while Yibgear breaks the stall and sees the man. Mordecai calls for Rigby to open up. Rigby runs out of the bathroom screaming and then trips. The man is seen thrown through the roof of the restroom and lands on the ground while Skips, Mordecai, and Rigby scream. 3 long scratches are shown on the man's back. Skip says, "That guy's dead." The man gets up and transforms into a demon werewolf similar to Yibgear. He turns around and growls at them. Mordecai says, "That guy's not dead." Yibgear then crashes through the wall of the restroom and stands next to the demon man. Skips, Mordecai, and Rigby scream and run away as Yibgear chases after them. The scene cuts to a man jogging who didn't notice Mordecai, Rigby, and Skips ran across his path as he wears headphones listening to music. The man notices Yibgear as it scratches him. The man transforms into a demon but continues to jog just like he did earlier. The scene cuts to a couple hugging each other as Mordecai, Rigby, and Skips ran across their path. They scream as Yibgear scratches them, turning them into demons. The scene then goes to Muscle Man chasing High Five Ghost, saying to come back because he's not done with him yet. Yibgear then scratches Muscle Man. High Five Ghost calls out for Muscle Man. Muscle Man turns into a demon werewolf and continues chasing after High Five Ghost. The scene goes to Mordecai, Rigby, and Skips running. Mordecai asks what that thing is and says it's like Rigby, but evil. The scene goes to Benson cleaning up litter. Benson complains he can't believe he has to do this when he sees Mordecai, Rigby, and Skips running towards the golf cart. Benson says there they are and tells them to get over there. Mordecai, Rigby, and Skips get into the golf cart. Rigby tells Benson to come with them. Benson says what? And that he's not going anywhere until he finishes. Ibgir comes and scratches Benson. Rigby yells for Benson. Skips tells Mordecai to step on it. Mordecai speeds away while Ibgir chases them. Mordecai asks Skips if he knows what they're supposed to do. Skips says he's seen this before and that they have to do something. Ibgir catches up to them, grabs Skips's leg and yanks him off the cart. Skips yells, "No!" Mordecai and Rigby call for Skips. Rigby says, "Jinx!" Mordecai punches Rigby and tells him to shut up. Mordecai suggests maybe the monster will go away if he unjinxes Rigby. A bunch of demon werewolves are seen in front of the golf cart's path. Rigby yells to stop. Mordecai steps on the brakes. Mordecai says it's Pops. Pops is seen being held hostage by the demon werewolves. Pops asks where they're taking him and demands they put him down at once. A demon werewolf sees Mordecai and Rigby and growls at them, making them scream while the other demon werewolves walk towards them. Rigby says they see them and tells Mordecai to go. Mordecai steps on the gas pedal and they speed away from the demon werewolves. Rigby says Mordecai has to do it now and unjinx him. Mordecai says all right and says Rigby's name 3 times. Rigby tenses, then relaxes. Mordecai asks if it worked. Rigby looks behind them and sees no one. He says he thinks so. Mordecai screams as Ibgir jumps out of the trees in front of them. He turns the cart away from Ibgir. Mordecai says he thought Rigby said it worked. Rigby says they're going to die. Mordecai tells him to calm down and think about what happened while he was in the bathroom. Rigby says he said his name 3 times and that thing came out of the mirror. Mordecai asks what else. Rigby lists that he locked the door, turned on the water, and shut off the light. Mordecai realizes it's the mirror, and they have to get back to that mirror. Mordecai turns the cart around and they speed towards the restrooms. They run inside and Mordecai locks the door. Rigby says he doesn't think that's going to help. Mordecai turns and sees the huge hole in the wall. Ibgir hops in front of it. It howls, calling the rest of the demon werewolves to walk towards the restroom. Mordecai tells Rigby to do it. Rigby looks at the mirror and says his name 3 times. He bangs on the mirror, saying, "Come on!" Mordecai says they're still coming and tells Rigby they should do it together. Mordecai runs to the mirror. Mordecai and Rigby say Rigby's name 3 times together. They turn around and see a demonized Benson, Pops, and Skips entering the hole. Ibgir jumps through the hole in the ceiling, howls, and lands in the restroom. Mordecai and Rigby keep saying Rigby's name 3 times repeatedly. They bang the mirror and Ibgir is seen running towards them. Mordecai says Rigby 3 times. Rigby says Rigby 3 times. Mordecai and Rigby say Rigby's name over and over together 6 times, rapidly. Their breath creates a fog on the mirror, which reveals Rigby's and Ibgir's names. Mordecai gasps and says Ibgir's name is in reverse. Ibgir is still running and getting closer to Mordecai and Rigby. Mordecai and Rigby say Ibgir 3 times. The scene goes to slow motion as Ibgir jumps about to scratch a scared Mordecai and Rigby when a portal opens in the mirror. Ibgir gets sucked into the portal and a white screen is shown for a second. Back in daylight, Mordecai and Rigby walk outside and find the scratched victims in their underwear, confused about what just happened. Benson says Mordecai and Rigby are in so much trouble. Mordecai and Rigby greet Benson. Mordecai says he can totally explain. Benson says he doesn't want to hear it, and that he wanted that trash picked up hours ago. Mordecai and Rigby look at each other. Mordecai says they're sorry. Rigby says, yeah, they'll do it right away. Benson is about to say something but stops himself. He says, well, all right, and walks away. Rigby tells Mordecai to look. Pops, Muscle Man, and High Five Ghost are seen with Pops and Muscle Man shirtless. Pops asks how on earth he got there. Muscle Man complains his head hurts. Pops asks if anyone has seen his hat. Skips is seen skipping up to Mordecai and Rigby. Skips says, looks like they're off the hook because nobody remembers anything. Mordecai asks how make Skips hasn't lost his memory. Skips says his mind's a steel trap and tells them not to do that again. Skips skips away. Mordecai and Rigby say they won't. Rigby says jinx and laughs. Mordecai says whatever. Rigby starts punching Mordecai, saying, "No talking while you're jinxed." He grunts repeatedly, asking how Mordecai likes it. He realizes his punches don't affect Mordecai, and keeps asking how he likes it with less confidence. Mordecai says he feels bad for Rigby, that he'll never be able to fully enjoy this game. There's a pause, and then Rigby gets mad and pokes Mordecai in the eye, making him yell as the episode ends. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Gravesites, Season 2, Episode 19. Gravesites is disturbing because it takes a simple fundraiser idea and transforms it into a zombie outbreak where the undead literally crawl out of their graves to attack innocent moviegoers. The episode aired during Season 2 and shows what happens when Mordecai and Rigby's carelessness with a special projector accidentally brings the dead back to life. What makes this episode particularly unsettling is how the park workers have to fight off hordes of zombies using sports equipment, while desperately trying to protect a crowd of unsuspecting people who think the carnage is just part of the 3D movie experience. The episode begins with the park workers outside, where Benson has an announcement. He tells everyone to listen up because the cart needs a new suspension system, and he doesn't know why that would be. Mordecai and Rigby look around nervously. Benson continues explaining that the old cemetery is falling apart and the house needs general repairs. Muscle Man asks what's wrong with the house. The stair he's sitting on breaks, answering his question. Benson says that's what's wrong with the house. The problem is they don't have the money to fix any of it. He asks if anyone has any ideas for how they can raise the money to cover these costs. Rigby raises his hand. Benson calls on him. Rigby asks, "What's in it for them?" Benson says if they come up with something successful, they'll get a paid day off. The camera zooms in closer to Benson's mouth for those 3 words. Mordecai and Rigby react with surprise. Muscle Man says he's got some choice sports equipment in the shed and suggests having a sports tournament to get physical. The stair breaks apart and he falls through. Benson asks for any other ideas. Pops suggests a bake sale. Benson says no. Skips suggests a concert. Benson makes an uncertain sound. Mordecai starts to speak, but Benson cuts him off, saying no. Rigby tries to speak and Benson says no again. Mordecai tells Benson to just hear them out. Benson sighs and asks what it is. Rigby says they could have a scary movie night. Mordecai adds, "Yeah, in the abandoned cemetery." Benson asks if they want to see a scary movie there. Mordecai says yes. Benson says that could actually work and admits it's not a bad idea. Muscle Man protests. Skip says they had a movie night there a long time ago and it was a huge success. Pops says a night of the macabre in the crypt sounds exciting. Benson says it's settled then and gives everyone their jobs. Skips will set up the chairs. Pops will be in charge of concession. Muscle Man and High Five Ghost will have decoration duties. Muscle Man celebrates and high-fives High Five Ghost. Benson says he'll be in charge of admissions. He pauses before telling Mordecai and Rigby they're in charge of getting the movie and getting the word out. But if this doesn't work, they won't be getting a paid day off. Mordecai says it's going to work. Mordecai and Rigby start rapping about how they know everything about scary movies while Benson knows nothing. They'll save the park with their knowledge of scary movies. Benson yells for them to stop singing or they're fired. They finish their rap quietly. Mordecai says they'll go get the movie. Mordecai and Rigby go to Movie Shack Hut. Mordecai asks if Rigby has found anything yet. The scene goes inside the store. Rigby says they have to get this one and shows Mordecai a video cassette of Mounties of Death Hoser Spree. Mordecai says the book was better and puts back the tape. He picks up another one saying, "This is a classic of Italian horror. It's a VHS of Libraria Beware the Dewey Decimal System." Rigby asks, what is with Mordecai because nobody is going to want to read subtitles? The Movie Shack Hut employee tells them if they think they know about horror to come into his lair. He gets a DVD from under the counter saying, this is from his personal stash. Mordecai and Rigby look at it and scary music plays in the background. The employee announces it's Zombocalypse 3D. Rigby says he saw this a few years back. The employee says no, he didn't. Rigby asks what he means. The employee explains this is the foreign bootleg director's cut. 3 hours and 28 minutes of remastered horror and gore that will make your eyeballs barf. Mordecai takes the tape out of the case and asks what kind of tape this is. The employee says it's Zetamax 3D, the only way to truly experience this movie. Of course they'll need one of these babies. He groans as he picks up the projector. It's the Zetamax Projectron LLX, and it will make those zombies really pop. Mordecai and Rigby say, "Whoa." The employee smiles. Mordecai says they'll take it. The employee says, "Wise choice," and picks up a bunch of dirty 3D glasses. He says they're going to need some of these babies. The camera zooms in on the glasses. He says he'll go ring them up. Mordecai and Rigby celebrate their paid day off. They high-five and it cuts to a montage. The montage shows Mordecai and Rigby going to the cemetery to clean up the garbage that covers it. They hand out posters, but no one takes them. Skips is seen reading the newspaper. Mordecai and Rigby set up the projector. Muscle Man and High Five Ghost make decorations. Mordecai and Rigby hang up posters. Benson is at the snack bar and people show up. Mordecai and Rigby are at HorrorCon passing out the posters. A line of people comes to get their tickets at the snack bar, and money is falling around Benson. The montage ends and goes to the cemetery where Skips hands out the 3D glasses and Pops is making cotton candy. Pop says to get your candy cobwebs on a stick. Benson says he can't believe it because they actually did it. Muscle Man says he still thinks they should have had a sports tournament. If this movie night fails, which he knows it will, he's got his sports gear there as a backup plan. Muscle Man drops the equipment on the ground. He says the others are going to thank him for this. Muscle Man walks away and Rigby starts the movie. The crowd cheers. The movie begins with the zombie slayer walking down a street. He narrates that he was your average, everyday kind of guy. But that was before it all happened, before the satellite triggered the deadly necrovirus and took everything he ever knew. A zombie comes out of a car window. Zombie Slayer says, "Batter up!" He hits the zombie with his bat, which makes the zombie hit the screen, and the title comes up. Zombie Slayer announces this is Zombocalypse 3D. The crowd cheers. Mordecai and Rigby celebrate and high-five each other. The movie shows Zombie Slayer and his girlfriend in a house while the zombies are outside. Zombie Slayer tells his baby not to worry because he's got these suckers. He says baby again questioningly. His girlfriend turns out to be a zombie. Zombie Slayer says, "Oh, great!" She tackles him and hisses. The crowd gasps. Rigby is shaking and saying, "Oh man!" repeatedly. Zombie Slayer tells his baby she let herself go real bad. She groans. Mordecai grabs Rigby's shoulder, which makes Rigby yell and knock over the projector, causing the film to stop. The crowd boos. Rigby asks why Mordecai did that. Mordecai says he didn't know Rigby would freak out that bad. A man says he wants his money back. Others agree, and Benson, who's in the crowd, turns around to see Mordecai and Rigby. Benson yells at them to fix it. Mordecai says, "Come on!" They put the projector back on the box. Rigby blows on the tape, then spits on it. Mordecai asks why Rigby spit on it. Rigby tells him to shut up. Rigby puts the tape in the projector the wrong way and it doesn't work. Mordecai asks why it's not working. Benson slams his chair against the ground while yelling at them to fix it. Rigby gets on the projector and shakes it. This causes rays to go out and into the ground while one of them hits a guy. The man yells that his kidneys hurt. A zombie is seen awakening. Mordecai takes the tape out and tells Rigby he put it in backwards. Mordecai puts it in the projector the right way and says, "There." The movie continues playing. The crowd cheers and Benson goes back to watching the movie. Mordecai and Rigby say, "Phew." Rigby sarcastically thanks Mordecai for almost getting rid of their paid day off, calling him a loser. A zombie is seen coming out of the ground, rips the screen and walks toward the crowd. Rigby says, "Whoa," and comments that the zombies really do pop out at you. Mordecai agrees totally and notes that one is coming really far off the screen. He realizes they're not wearing their 3D glasses. The zombie walks up to a man and grabs his arm. The man chuckles and tells other people to check this out. Rigby says, "That's a real zombie." The zombie is about to bite the man's arm. Mordecai panics, asking what they should do. Zombie Slayer grabs a round chainsaw blade and says, "Hey, worm bait!" He throws it and it decapitates the zombie. Zombie Slayer says, "Heads up!" The crowd cheers. Mordecai points out Muscle Man's sports stuff. They run to the pile. Mordecai picks up a discus, throws it. and decapitates the zombie. Rigby says, "Nice shot." The ground shakes, and Rigby asks, "What's happening now?" Zombie Slayer says, "Okay, genius, let me put this in terms you'll understand. The zombies come out of the ground." He explains that the thing they just did has woken up the dead and they're ticked off. The zombies walk towards the crowd and their arms are seen reaching towards them. Mordecai tells Rigby that if anyone gets hurt, they won't get their paid day off. They have to keep the zombies away from the people. Mordecai grabs discuses and Rigby grabs javelins and they yell. A man reaches out towards a zombie saying, "Oh, cool!" A javelin is thrown into the zombie. The man says the zombie just took a hit. Various zombies are seen killed by discuses. The man asks if people saw that zombie get a discus to the face. The crowd cheers. Rigby fights off the zombies and matches Zombie Slayer's moves in the movie. A zombie grabs Rigby's javelin. Rigby says, "Whoa!" The zombie pushes him, which makes Rigby stab another zombie, causing its head to be stabbed. Rigby hits two zombies and hits the one that pushed him. Rigby yells, "No!" A javelin gets thrown into a zombie's back, and it's shown that Muscle Man threw it. Muscle Man tells them he said this stuff would come in handy. 3 zombies are seen walking near Muscle Man: High Five Ghost, Rigby, and Mordecai. Skips grabs a long stick laying against a tree. Skips tells them to duck. Skips screams and runs towards the zombies while Zombie Slayer does the same thing on the screen. Skips stabs the 3 zombies, flips, and crushes their heads. Zombie Slayer is kneeling and says, "Better fire up the grill because he's got himself a zombie kebab." The crowd cheers. The scene goes to Pops, who's laughing while zombies go near him. Pops tells them not to crowd because there's enough for everybody. Mordecai calls for Pops. Mordecai throws a discus which decapitates all the zombies. A zombie grabs Pops' shoulder and screams. Muscle Man tells the wormhole to get a tasty lick of this. Muscle Man throws a shot put ball and it decapitates the zombie. Benson reaches out to a zombie saying, "Wow, this is awesome!" Mordecai screams and decapitates the zombie with a discus. The head bounces off Benson's head and he laughs, thinking it's 3D. The scene goes to a grave nearby with the name Howard Hellion Fightington, and a big muscular arm comes out of the ground. Mordecai says he thinks they got them all. Howard walks in front of the screen and looks similar to the big zombie seen in the movie. Howard cracks his neck and growls. Mordecai tells Skips to look out. Howard growls and Skips kicks his crotch, but it turns to dust. Howard looks up at Skips with a painless expression. Skips says, "Oh no!" Howard punches Skips, picks him up off the ground and throws him to where Mordecai and Rigby are. Mordecai and Rigby throw their javelins, but Howard catches them and throws them back. Mordecai and Rigby barely get away, and they groan in pain as they fall. Mordecai says he's just too strong. Rigby points out a cart. The zombies are blinded by the cart headlights while Zombie Slayer is seen in a car. Mordecai starts saying, "Okay, you lousy undead creep." Zombie Slayer in the movie says, "You've taken a lot from me, but if you think you're going to deprive me of my..." Mordecai says, "Paid day off." Mordecai and Zombie Slayer say together that the zombie is sorely mistaken. Both of them step on the gas and drive towards the zombies. Mordecai and Rigby nod to each other and leap out of the cart, surprising Howard. The cart explodes when it hits him. Mordecai and Rigby say, "Whoa!" The screen burns away as soon as the movie ends. Benson laughs. Rigby is holding the box with money in it. Mordecai says he thinks they totally did it. Benson laughs and says, "That was great. It felt like he was in the actual movie." He tells them they totally earned that paid day off. Mordecai and Rigby high-five each other, celebrating. Benson says they're going to earn another one because they're doing this again tomorrow night, the exact same way. He laughs and walks away. Mordecai asks if Rigby thinks they can take that paid day off tomorrow. The episode ends. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have The Night Owl, Season 2, Episode 22. The Night Owl is disturbing because it takes a simple radio contest and transforms it into a nightmare, where contestants are deliberately frozen in liquid nitrogen for over 2,000 years by a manipulative radio host obsessed with fame. The episode aired during Season 2 and shows what happens when Mordecai, Rigby, Muscle Man, and High Five Ghost enter a contest to win a vintage muscle car by being the last person standing on a billboard. What makes this episode particularly unsettling is how the Night Owl psychologically manipulates the four friends into turning against each other through lies, then cryogenically preserves them as museum exhibits in a dystopian future where he's become a cultural icon built on their frozen bodies. The episode begins with Mordecai, Rigby, Muscle Man, and High Five Ghost drinking soda and listening to music. Muscle Man announces it's time for a drum solo and shakes 2 cans of soda. Everyone laughs. Muscle Man thanks them for sharing the sodas. Mordecai says, "Yeah, man," and thanks Muscle Man for sharing the tunes. The Night Owl speaks over the radio asking who's coming at them and announcing it's the Night Owl. Muscle Man tells everyone to shut their faces because it's the Night Owl. The Night Owl asks if people like cars and love cars, and if a car was a girl, would you take her on a date and try to get to second base? He announces who's giving away a brand new vintage muscle car. Muscle Man turns up the volume. The Night Owl explains all you have to be is the last one standing on the catwalk up the WHOZ billboard downtown, but you have to be in it to win it. So come on down tomorrow at noon for your chance to win. Mordecai repeats a vintage muscle car questioningly. Rigby asks if it's just for standing. Muscle Man says it's sweet. Mordecai says maybe it's just the sodas talking, but he thinks they should work together to win that car. Muscle Man says he doesn't know because they've never really worked together before. Mordecai says maybe it's time they cracked open an ice-cold can of teamwork, yelling for the car. Rigby agrees they should. Muscle Man says, "Let's do it." Everyone celebrates. The scene circle wipes to the WHOZ billboard. The Night Owl announces, "Hey there, radio listeners! This is the Night Owl, coming to you live from the Night Owl's first annual Standoff for the Steal." He says they certainly have some ambitious people out there, but only time will tell who has the drive for the ride. Muscle Man says he can't wait to shove a key into that car. Rigby says they're going to look so cool all up in there. Mordecai agrees, yeah, they will. Muscle Man notices someone looking and asks if there's something on his face. The person says no. Muscle Man yells at them to quit staring. Mordecai tells him to save it for the contest. The Night Owl says, "All right, everybody," he hopes they're all comfortable up there because the Standoff for the Steal starts in 3, 2, 1. He makes sound effects and the crowd begins cheering. Mordecai tells the guys to bring it in. Mordecai, Rigby, High Five Ghost, and Muscle Man get in a huddle. Mordecai says they're not leaving here today without that car, so they know what they have to do. Rigby says, yeah, send those other losers home on their crappy cars. The four of them use many tactics to get rid of the other contestants. They knock over coffee and elbow people. They shoot spitballs. They fan the sweat off from Muscle Man to the other 3 contestants. Finally, they use a plan to scare the last person off by having Rigby warn the contestant that Muscle Man is stabbing Mordecai and his ghost, which was High Five Ghost floating away. The Night Owl announces they're down now with the final 4, but don't worry, because there's still plenty of contest left. A WHOZ worker tells the Night Owl that the tech guy heard those final 4 talking, and they're going to share the car, so it's over. The Night Owl asks what, saying the contest can't be over because his ratings were just starting to get good. He tells them to bring in the isolation booth. The booth gets up at the top of the billboard. The Night Owl asks how it feels to be a part of the final 4. Rigby says it feels great. Mordecai says awesome. High Five Ghost says it's exciting. Muscle Man celebrates. The Night Owl asks how they made it this far. Muscle Man says, "Working together, baby." The Night Owl laughs and asks what they're going to do with the car. Rigby says, "Share it." The Night Owl says that's funny because that's not what Mordecai said. Muscle Man asks what Mordecai said. The Night Owl says that Mordecai was going to take the car for himself. High Five Ghost asks if Rigby said that. The Night Owl says, yeah, that's what Muscle Man said. Mordecai says he knew it. Rigby calls someone a jerk. High Five Ghost says he can't believe this. Muscle Man says someone's going to pay. The Night Owl laughs and tells them if they really want that car, then they better make sure they're the last one off the WHOZ billboard, because there can only be one winner. The scene cuts to the WHOZ billboard with Mordecai, Rigby, Muscle Man, and High Five Ghost in the tent. Mordecai says, "Well, they did it." Muscle Man says, "Yep." Rigby says, "Yeah." Muscle Man says all that's left to do now is step down and get the car. Rigby says that sounds about right. Muscle Man says he'll meet them down there because he has to take down the tent first. Mordecai says, no, they'll take care of the tent and Muscle Man should go first. Muscle Man says he's not stepping off this thing until the other three step off it first. Mordecai asks what that's supposed to mean. Muscle Man says it means he knows what they're up to. Mordecai asks angrily if Muscle Man knows what he's up to, saying he knows what Muscle Man is up to. Step 1, working with Muscle Man was a huge mistake, and Step 2, get off this billboard because Muscle Man smells like barf. Muscle Man yells that Mordecai smells like barf. Mordecai, Rigby, Muscle Man, and High Five Ghost start to beat each other up. The scene cuts to the outside, where a hose is inserted into the tent, leading to a tank of liquid nitrogen, the Night Owl says. And now a little insurance to make sure this little competition doesn't end too early. He laughs evilly. The scene shows Mordecai, Rigby, High Five Ghost, and Muscle Man frozen. The scene now shows the WHOZ billboard as the days went on and the years went by. The screen shows year 4224. The scene shows a museum of the Night Owl. The scene shows the tank running out of liquid nitrogen. The scene shows Mordecai, Rigby, High Five Ghost, and Muscle Man in the melting ice. Mordecai is not frozen anymore and yells that Muscle Man smells like barf. Mordecai punches Muscle Man and he wakes up asking what happened. Rigby gasps. High Five Ghost gasps. Mordecai, Rigby, High Five Ghost, and Muscle Man look around in silence. Rigby angrily tells someone to get off of the billboard, calling them a barf sack. Muscle Man angrily tells Rigby not to call him a barf sack. Rigby, Muscle Man, and High Five Ghost start fighting again. Mordecai yells for them to stop, saying something's not right. Mordecai opens the tent and all of them are shocked. The scene shows them and the billboard in a glass display case, with everything around the museum visible. Rigby asks how long they've been up there. Mordecai says he thinks they're in the future. Muscle Man says this is all Mordecai's fault. Mordecai asks why him, saying Muscle Man was the one who was trying to get the car for himself. Yeah, that's right. The Night Owl told Mordecai what Muscle Man said. Muscle Man asks what he said. Mordecai points at Muscle Man, saying that he was going to trick them so he could get the car for himself. Muscle Man tells Mordecai to get his hand out of his face and slaps Mordecai's hand. He says he never said that, and that's what Rigby said. Rigby asks, what? Muscle Man says that's what the Night Owl told him. Rigby says, but the Night Owl told him that's what High Five Ghost said. High Five Ghost says he never said that. Mordecai says, wait a minute, he thinks the Night Owl tricked them. Muscle Man says, yeah, he thinks Mordecai is right. A security guard asks what they're doing up in the exhibit. He gasps and says, they're the contestants. He presses an emergency button and talks on a walkie-talkie saying, contestants are unfrozen, repeating, unfrozen, and requesting backup immediately. The conversation ends, and more liquid nitrogen is coming from the display case's ceiling. Mordecai says that's not good, and they have to get out of there. He asks Muscle Man if he can start that car. Muscle Man says yeah, and to blow this popsicle stand. Mordecai tells everyone to go. Mordecai, Rigby, and High Five Ghost get down from the ladders. Muscle Man says to get to the car because Fives and him can hotwire it. Muscle Man slides down the stairs, celebrating. He slides on the car but falls, then gets up and goes into the car. The security guard tells them to stop and stay where they are. The guard teleports close to the car door. The security guard tells them to get out of the car. He bangs on the car door. Mordecai says, let's go! Muscle Man hotwires the car. The security guard breaks the car window. Mordecai tells them to go. Muscle Man drives the car and crashes through the glass. The security guard speaks to his walkie-talkie saying they've got a problem. The scene goes to the Night Owl's front desk. The security guard says contestants are fleeing premises and officers are in pursuit. The Night Owl says, don't let them escape. The scene shows Muscle Man driving the car with Rigby and High Five Ghost looking behind them. The security guard says, stop runners and return to your display at once by the order of the Night Owl. Muscle Man questions Night Owl. Mordecai says the Night Owl must have built this museum around the contest. The scene shows them still getting away from the guards. A picture of Benson says he always knew those guys were special. Guards are zapping at them with cryo-lasers, with one shot freezing the car's mirror. Muscle Man says they have to find the time machine. Mordecai and Rigby ask what? Muscle Man says they're in the future, so there's got to be a time machine. Mordecai says he doesn't think so, but gets cut off. The museum PA announces, "Attention museum patrons, the time machine exhibit will be closing in 5 minutes." Muscle Man celebrates and tells them to eat on that. Rigby tells Muscle Man to get closer to that info booth. Rigby hangs on to High Five Ghost's arm while getting a map from the info booth. Mordecai asks how they're going to find the Time Pavilion. The map says Time Pavilion, and that it's calculating directions. Rigby says it's still loading. The security is still firing lasers. Muscle Man tells Mordecai to take the wheel. Muscle Man gets on top of the car, and Mordecai is now driving. The guards open fire while Muscle Man takes off his shirt and spins it. One laser hits Muscle Man's shirt, freezing it into a block of ice. He throws it to one of the guards. The other two climb on top of the car. Muscle Man and Fives fight them off, and both of them get back inside the car. The map says download complete, and that the Time Machine Pavilion is in 0.7 miles, telling them to turn right. Mordecai steers to his right. Rigby says, "There it is! They made it to the entrance!" Everyone celebrates. Mordecai says they're going to make it. The Night Owl comes right in the middle of their path. Everyone screams. Rigby says, "It's the Night Owl." Muscle Man tells him to get out of the way and that they need to use his time machine. The Night Owl fires lasers at them. Everyone screams. Mordecai steers to avoid the lasers. The Night Owl says they can't leave this place because he froze them thousands of years ago. He made what they are and what they always must be, which is ice cubes in his drink of success. He tells them to get back in their glass. They still go for the time machine, then crack the Night Owl's containment sphere on his suit and leave his disembodied head there. The time machine computer says, "Select year of contest." Muscle Man throws a balled-up sock at the Day 1 button. The time machine computer says, "Day 1 of contest selected." They all jump toward the time portal. The Night Owl yells, "No!" Mordecai, Muscle Man, Rigby, and High Five Ghost enter the portal. The scene shows the past Night Owl saying, "Let's see. Awesome idea for a contest, check. Cool prize for a contest, check. And enough liquid nitrogen to make sure the contest lasts long enough to make him famous, check." He laughs evilly. The scene moves to show the sky, and the time portal opens up with the car containing Mordecai, Rigby, Muscle Man, and High Five Ghost falling through, plummeting toward the billboard. The car crashes onto the Night Owl's billboard and lands on top of the car, destroying it. The Night Owl yells, "No!" and says that's his car. Mordecai coughs as he exits the wrecked car. Muscle Man kicks the car door to get out while the others get out. The Night Owl says he maxed out his student loans for that car, and they're going to have to pay for it. Muscle Man punches him in the face and he collapses. Muscle Man says that's for freezing them on purpose. They leave him alone. The Night Owl weakly makes a sound. The scene cuts to Mordecai, Rigby, Muscle Man, and High Five Ghost. Mordecai says, "Man, he's glad that's over with." Muscle Man says, "Yeah, that contest blew." Rigby asks if they think they'll run into their past selves. Mordecai says, "Nah, you can't exist with yourself in any given moment in time. It doesn't work that way." Rigby says, "Oh, okay. He guesses that makes sense." Muscle Man says, "And if it does work that way, they can always just fight to the death with each of their copies." Everyone laughs. Their past selves heard what Muscle Man said and are now shocked at their present selves. Past Mordecai says, The episode ends. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Camping Can Be Cool, Season 3, Episode 5. Camping Can Be Cool is disturbing because it takes a romantic camping trip and transforms it into a nightmare where a half-human, half-deer creature hunts the group through the forest, planning to kill and eat them while using all their body parts. The episode aired during Season 3 and shows what happens when Mordecai invites Margaret and Eileen on a camping trip to his secret spot in a restricted area of the National Forest. What makes this episode particularly unsettling is the revelation that the Stagman is a tragic figure abandoned by his mother, now living alone in the woods as a twisted hybrid who sees humans as both invaders and food sources. The episode begins at the coffee shop with the TV set to the Weather Channel. Mordecai jokes about big trouble in the Western Hemisphere and that these teeth are going to bite down on this snowstorm. Rigby adds that this cloud is going to punch some dude in the face. Mordecai says more at 11. They both laugh. Margaret walks up asking if they need any more, but Rigby shushes her loudly, saying, "This is it." He increases the TV volume. The weather girl announces the weekend weather forecast and tells people to have their sunglasses ready because it will be 2 days of clear skies and sunshine. Mordecai and Rigby both say sunshine excitedly. Eileen says they're talking about the weather and that she loves the weather. Margaret asks why they're so interested in the weather. Mordecai says they're going on a camping trip. Eileen says, "Wow, really?" and that she loves camping, adding that camping is so cool. She asks Margaret if she agrees. Margaret says unsurely that, sure, she's never been camping before. Mordecai asks if she's never been camping. Rigby asks, what's wrong with her? Mordecai punches Rigby. Margaret says no, it's all right, and that it's just never appealed to her. Rigby says yeah, she probably would like it. Margaret says, well, Mordecai tells her not to listen to Rigby and that camping can be really cool. There's hiking in the mountains and looking at the stars at night, and they even have a secret camping spot. Eileen says that's so awesome and wishes they could go with them. Mordecai asks, why don't they? Rigby, Margaret, and Eileen all react with surprise. Mordecai asks why not, saying the more the merrier, right? Margaret says she doesn't know. Eileen tells her to come on because it will be fun. Margaret says okay, she guesses it could be cool. Eileen hugs Margaret, celebrating. Rigby tells Margaret she probably shouldn't go because he bets her boyfriend won't like her going out on a camping trip with 2 dudes. Margaret asks what boyfriend, saying she's not seeing anyone right now and that guys are jerks. Mordecai agrees, saying guys are the worst while pulling a face expression at Rigby. He says, so it's settled. They're all going camping. Margaret laughs, asking how she can argue with enthusiasm like that. The scene shows Margaret's car leaving the park. Everyone seems to enjoy the trip, except for Rigby. The scene shows the car going to the National Forest. A park ranger greets them. Margaret says hi. The park ranger points to the radio. Margaret apologizes and turns off the radio. The park ranger asks where they're all heading today. Margaret starts to ask Mordecai about the secret spot, but Mordecai cuts her off, saying they're just heading up to the campgrounds. The park ranger asks if they mean Vine Ridge or Valley Fields. Mordecai says yeah and shakes his head. The park ranger looks confused but gives them a map and tells them to stick to the road and trails. Margaret says great. Margaret and Eileen thank him. Eileen asks which way they're heading. Mordecai says no, they don't need that, and takes the map from Eileen, telling Margaret to stop right here. Margaret asks, right here? The car stops and the sign says, restricted, no public access. Mordecai tells Rigby to go. Rigby says, excuse me, he's getting out, and opens the gate. Eileen asks what they're doing. Mordecai says they told them. It's the secret spot. Margaret says, but it says restricted, and she doesn't think they're supposed to be there. Mordecai says no, it's fine because they always do this, telling her to just trust him. Margaret drives inside. They get out of the car and see a camping spot. Margaret asks if this is their secret camping spot. Mordecai says, yeah, they always come here, and it's really far from the other campsites, so no one bothers them. Eileen asks if they're sure they won't get in trouble. Mordecai says it's fine, and asks if they're ready for the best part. He walks off, telling them to check this out. Margaret and Eileen open up 2 trees to show 2 waterfalls and a river. Both wow at the beautiful view. Mordecai stares at Margaret, asking if, it's not bad, right? Margaret stares at Mordecai, saying, it's beautiful. Rigby calls from off-screen, asking Mordecai where the matches are. Mordecai asks, what? Rigby says the matches because he wants to cook some hot dogs. Mordecai says they should be in that pack. Rigby says he can't find them. Mordecai takes the pack and looks in it, confirming they're not in there. Rigby asks if Mordecai forgot them. Mordecai asks what Rigby means he forgot them. Margaret runs up, telling them not to fight because they probably just fell out of the bag or something. Eileen says it's cool because she's got it. By rubbing 2 sticks together, she makes a fire and blows it to make it bigger. Mordecai asks if she found the matches. Eileen says no, she just did it the old-fashioned way. Margaret says wow, and that she didn't know Eileen was so handy. Eileen says she used to get lost in the woods a lot. Margaret asks when she was a kid. Eileen says last year, and that it was kind of a phase she was going through. Margaret says, oh, well, and good job. Prizing says, yeah, that was kind of cool. Eileen blushes from what Rigby said. Rigby picks up hot dogs and says, catch. He throws hot dogs at Eileen right in her face. The hot dogs fall in her hands and her face turns red. Eileen looks down at the hot dogs, saying, oh, nice. These are really good hot dogs. The episode shows a montage. First, they eat hot dogs from the fire, then go hiking to a waterfall, then go swimming. When walking, they see a deer that Margaret tries to take a picture of. When she was about to pick up a frog, she sees Eileen with 4 snakes. Rigby shows a bite which grosses Margaret and Eileen out. They see the deer again for a second when Mordecai walks up. It's night, and Rigby and Eileen are playing video games while Mordecai is with Margaret laying on her car. Margaret says, this is beautiful, and the sky is so clear out here. She looks at a constellation, asking if Mordecai knows any of the thingies. Mordecai asks, thingies? Margaret says, yeah, the thingies. Mordecai asks, constellations. Margaret says, yeah, constellations. Mordecai says, oh, those thingies. Margaret elbows him and tells him to be quiet. Mordecai says he thinks that's a Ursula merger right there, pointing at a constellation and asking her to see the handle in the ladle. Eileen says, it's called Ursa Major, not Ursula Merger, and that's not even it. That's Orion. She doesn't even look up from her video game. Rigby celebrates. Rigby, Margaret, and Eileen laugh. Mordecai says, okay, so he doesn't know those thingies, but wait, he can show her something cool. He asks for her keys. Margaret gives him the keys. He opens a car door and sticks the key onto the switch that turned the ignition, turns on the audio system to some romantic music, closes the door and gets back on the car. Margaret says, nice save. Margaret lays down and their hands go close to each other. Mordecai asks if she's still taking those classes. Margaret says, yeah, and this semester's been crazy. Just been working in these extra projects. Mordecai says, yeah, but that was art school, so it's different. Margaret says she just can't wait until she can finally quit her dumb job. Mordecai asks what? Because then where will he get his coffee from? Margaret says the coffee will still be there. Mordecai says, yeah, it just wouldn't be the same. He asks if she doesn't think all guys are jerks, right? Margaret asks if he heard that. Mordecai asks what? Margaret listens and hears nothing, saying she doesn't know. Mordecai says it's just the sound of the wilderness, probably just that deer they saw earlier. Margaret rolls back over to Mordecai asking what he was saying. They hear thunder and it starts raining. Mordecai says he guesses they should set up the tent. He looks in the pack for the tents and asks Rigby where he put the tent. Rigby hesitates. Mordecai asks if it's in the other bag. Rigby says he didn't bring it. Mordecai says, dude, and that he told Rigby to pack it. Rigby says, yeah, but he wanted to use the tarps like they always do. Mordecai asks where the tarps are. Rigby says he forgot them. Mordecai yells, what? And the fire burns out. Margaret runs over asking what's going on. Mordecai says they don't have a tent. Eileen says it's okay because she brought hers, and it's in the car. Margaret says she'll get it. She attempts to open a door and sees the keys are on the switch to the ignition. Margaret tells Mordecai he locked the keys in the car. Rigby says, smooth move. Mordecai puts his hand on his forehead. Rigby says Mordecai had to turn on the radio. Mordecai says, oh great, and now the ranger's here. A car shows up and beeps. The park ranger asks what they're doing out here because this area is restricted. Eileen says she knows and they're sorry. Margaret says they locked their keys in the car. The park ranger says, all right, he's got some tools back at the station, but as soon as he gets that door open, he wants them out of there. Margaret and Eileen say, okay, and thank him. He leaves. Rigby says, oh great, and now they have to wait in the rain for that guy to come back. Eileen appears with a stick tent that got started, saying, let's build a shelter. They help Eileen put it together. She tells them to go grab some more dead branches. Margaret does and picks one, pulling it off a tree. She goes by some bushes when the deer pops out. She screams, then chuckles nervously. The deer speaks, telling her to take her filthy hands off the branches. Margaret asks, what? The deer comes out of the bushes, revealing he is half human. Margaret screams for Mordecai. She drops the sticks and runs to him. Mordecai asks what it is. The deer comes walking toward them. Mordecai yells, asking, "What's up, man?" The stagman says he has been watching for years now, seeing them bringing their filthy machines into his forest, setting her ablaze, drowning out her natural voice with their terrible music. He's had enough. Mordecai says, look, they're sorry, and they're not trying to ruin his home. They love the forest, right guys? Everyone says an answer. The stagman says just like Mother said she loved him and not to follow her back to the city. Mordecai asks, wait, what? The stagman says, they disgust him. His forest is ruined, and now he will count to 10 and hunt them for food. Everyone asks what? The stagman tells them not to fear because he will use all their parts with nothing wasted. He says, 1. Mordecai says, oh, dude. The stagman says, 2. They all run and Eileen picks up a rock. The stagman says, 3. Eileen busts a window on the car and goes in to hit the horn. Eileen says, come on! The stagman says 4 and tries to take out a bow and arrow from the top, but his antlers are too long. They all get in the car except the stagman. Margaret flips the key on the switch, but the engine fails to start. Margaret says the radio drained the battery. Rigby frowns at Mordecai. The stagman says 5, 6, and takes the bow and arrow out from under his feet. Everyone says, come on, repeatedly. The engine fires and starts. The stagman says 7, 8, 9, 10, and starts chasing after them. Margaret says, oh my gosh, repeatedly. Mordecai says, they're going to need to go faster. The stagman is catching up to the car. Mordecai and Rigby open the trunk and throw sodas at him, which makes him more mad. Mordecai yells and tells Rigby to get him something else to throw at the stagman. Mordecai slams a lantern in his face, which holds him back. Rigby says, in your face! Mordecai says he thinks they lost him. Just then, the stagman jumps on the top of the car. Everyone screams. He cuts a knife through the top, which makes Margaret swerve out of control down a hill. The deer falls off. He shoots a bow and arrow at the tire, and they stop by hitting a tree. They get out of the car and run. The deer jumps on the front of the car and jumps off. Mordecai sees another road. Mordecai says, there's the highway, and tells them to come on. The stagman shoots 3 arrows beside them and 1 under them. They get to the highway where the park ranger is coming. Rigby says, over there, and tells them to look because someone's coming. They all call for help. When the stagman is about to shoot them with arrows, the park ranger swerves around them. The park ranger yells as he goes around them and hits the stagman. The next morning, the park ranger tells them to move it along now because there's nothing more to see here. Margaret asks, what's going to happen to the stagman? She sees a guy throw the deer in the park ranger's truck. The park ranger says they've got special protocol for situations like that, telling them to drive safe. They drive away, and the park ranger goes to the back of his truck where the National Forest employee is. The park ranger asks if the boys called up the taxidermist. The National Forest employee says this is kind of strange while looking down at the deer. The park ranger says no, they'll just put some clothes on the human parts. Back in the car, Mordecai apologizes to Margaret. Margaret says she doesn't know because it wasn't all bad. She liked his secret camping spot. Eileen says she ate 7 hot dogs. Rigby says Eileen totally busted Margaret's window open with a rock. Eileen says, oh yeah, and apologizes to Margaret. Margaret says it's okay, and she's just stoked she survived her first camping trip. She looks to Mordecai in the rear mirror and thanks him. Mordecai chuckles and says, no problem, adding that he told her camping was cool. Everyone laughs and the episode ends. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Dead at 8, Season 3, Episode 27. Dead at 8 is disturbing because it takes a simple accident on a homemade water slide and transforms it into a life-or-death babysitting nightmare where Mordecai and Rigby must care for Death's ancient demonic child or lose Muscle Man's soul forever. The episode aired during Season 3 and shows what happens when Mordecai and Rigby dare Muscle Man to ride his unfinished water slide, causing Death himself to arrive and claim Muscle Man's soul. What makes this episode particularly unsettling is the revelation that Thomas, who appears to be a baby, is actually over 300 years old and deliberately manipulates his parents while unleashing a soul-eating monster that nearly devours Muscle Man. All while Death casually displays rings containing the souls of previous babysitters who failed. The scene takes place during a bright day. Muscle Man is hammering and sawing some wood. Mordecai says, "Looks like he's at it again." Rigby asks why Muscle Man wastes his time. Mordecai and Rigby walk toward Muscle Man. Mordecai tells him he's been building his water slide for 6 weeks. Rigby says he's never going to ride it. Muscle Man shakes his head and tells them to let him get real for a second. This slide is his life's work, and it has to be perfect. Rigby says they dare him to ride it right now. Muscle Man says he'll ride it when it's done. He walks toward wooden beams, explaining he still needs to add some support beams to the ramp so that he can clear his trailer and land in the lake. The camera shows the ramp, lake, a tree, and Muscle Man's car in the distance. Mordecai says it's totally sturdy. Muscle Man says yeah, but Rigby cuts him off by yelling, "Boo!" Muscle Man asks if Rigby thinks just because he's yelling boo that he's going to ignore something. Mordecai and Rigby both yell, "Boo!" Muscle Man runs, saying, "Fine, he'll do it!" Mordecai and Rigby laugh. Muscle Man is now on top of the hill and screws open a fire hydrant, saying he's totally going to do it. Mordecai says, "Sure he is." Rigby asks if Mordecai thinks he's really going to do it. Mordecai says no, he's never going to do it and he'll just wuss out like he did last week. Muscle Man appears shirtless and running while celebrating. Rigby says, "Yep, any second now he'll stop." Muscle Man is shown in slow motion as he jumps on the water slide. He's laying down on his back with his arms crossed over his chest. Mordecai says, shocked that he can't believe it and that Muscle Man did it. Muscle Man goes down the slide celebrating. Muscle Man passes Mordecai and Rigby. Rigby cheers. Mordecai tells him to go. Rigby says, "Go, man!" Muscle Man says, "In your face, suckers!" then gasps to see the ramp is breaking. Mordecai says, "Oh, geez!" Muscle Man yells as he hits his trailer, then crashes into some tree branches. Rigby says he could be all right, then gasps. Muscle Man slides off a tree branch and lands on top of his car. Mordecai asks if he's okay. Muscle Man gets up to show a bruised face with branches sticking out. Mordecai and Rigby scream. Muscle Man says, "Yeah, he's all good." He spits out a tooth and asks if they saw how cool he looked. Death comes through a portal, talking to someone on his phone. Death asks what they mean they can't babysit tonight. He knows it's short notice and he'll pay double. He tells them to wait and not hang up. Death walks over to Mordecai, Rigby, and Muscle Man. Death says he's in a bit of a rush today, so he'll just take Muscle Man's soul and be off. Muscle Man protests, saying he's barely even hurt and it's just a few broken things. Death interrupts and lifts up his scythe. Mordecai and Rigby yell for him to stop. Mordecai says it's all their fault and Muscle Man didn't even want to use the slide. Death says, "Sorry boys, no exceptions." Mordecai begs, saying they'll do anything. Death asks, "Anything?" Mordecai, Rigby, and Muscle Man all say, "Yeah!" Death says, "Wait a second, maybe they can make a deal. If the two of them babysit his son Thomas so he can take his wife out for their anniversary tonight, he'll let their friend go." Mordecai says, "Sure, not a problem." Death says, "Very good." Death pulls out an amulet and shrinks Muscle Man inside it. Muscle Man yells for help. Death says he'll be keeping their friend in this amulet until the wife and him return from dinner. And one more thing, if Thomas isn't asleep by 8 o'clock, Muscle Man's soul is his for eternity. The scene goes to Mordecai, Rigby, and Death, walking to his house and opening the front doors. Death calls out that he's home. Death's wife asks, "Who is that with him?" and to wait, let her guess, the babysitters. She walks down the stairs and walks over to the guys. She says, "Well, she must say they certainly don't look much like babysitters." Death chuckles, saying, "Of course they are. The best babysitters money can buy." Rigby laughs nervously, saying, "Yep, they're totally babysitters." Death's wife asks how her husband contacted them a month ago. Mordecai says phone. Rigby says email. Death says fax. Rigby says email, questioningly. Death says phone, questioningly. Mordecai says fax, questioningly. Death says all three, naturally, because he wanted to be thorough.
Death's wife asks if they've had experience with paranormal children.
Mordecai says yeah, pairs, one-on-one, all sorts of normal kids. Rigby asks where the little guy is anyway. Death calls for Thomas to say hi to Uncle Mordo and Uncle Riggs. Death's wife tells Thomas to come on. Thomas is seen babbling nearby. She tells him to come to Mommy and picks Thomas up. She says Thomas can be quite a handful and to make sure he's asleep when they get back. If he isn't, she'll be most disappointed in all of them. Death says he will be disappointed also and makes Muscle Man get squished in the amulet, asking if they get it. Death and his wife walk out. Death's wife asks where the reservation is. Death and his wife teleport into their car and drive off. Death says that extra fancy, extra available place. Muscle Man says he can't believe this and asks if they losers know what they're doing, asking if they even know how to get a kid to sleep. Rigby says, dude, no problem. Mordecai says, yeah, man, he's just a kid. The scene cuts to Thomas's room. Mordecai says, okay, little dude, time to go to sleep. Thomas talks like an adult, saying no, he refuses. Mordecai reacts with surprise. Rigby asks if Thomas can talk. Thomas says, of course he can, because he is over 300 years old. Mordecai asks if his parents know. Thomas says no, and let's keep it that way. He wants to ride this baby thing out for a little while longer, and before he slumbers, he demands that they play. Rigby says, well, okay, but Thomas better go to sleep after that. Mordecai nods. A montage of playing begins. Mordecai and Rigby let Thomas play with a small, scary-looking vacuum cleaner, and fiery sparks come out of it. Next, Rigby gives Thomas a black toy bunny, which he chews up, spits out, and tears the stuffing out of. Mordecai, Rigby, and Thomas start playing with fake guns. Muscle Man is not feeling amused. Thomas is later taken to a swing to play on, and he performs a fiery trick.
Mordecai and Rigby show some appreciation,
though it later gets out of hand. Thomas says that was an excellent playtime. Rigby says, okay, now Thomas needs to go to sleep. Thomas says in time, but right now he hungers for food. The scene cuts to the kitchen. Mordecai says, let's see what they can find. He opens the fridge, which appears to have a magical green light. Mordecai says, okay, soul juice, goat's feet, and almond milk. He finds something and pulls out a glass of milk, giving it to Thomas. Mordecai says, here you go, Thomas, warm milk. Thomas says, warm milk is nothing to him and whacks the glass away. He says he wants cookies. He sucks cookies into his mouth. He says he also loves sugar. He sucks sugar out of a bag in the cupboard, saying it gives him power. He starts bouncing around the kitchen. Muscle Man says they're hopeless and they couldn't put a kid to bed to save their lives. Rigby says sarcastically, well, it's a good thing it's Muscle Man's life at stake then. Muscle Man furiously begins banging the glass, saying to shut his face and that Rigby is lucky he's stuck in this ball. The phone starts to ring. Mordecai goes to answer it. Mordecai says, hello. Death says, dinner went magnificently, and they're coming back now. If Thomas isn't asleep, Muscle Man will be a permanent part of his wife's jewelry collection. He hangs up. Mordecai gasps and says they're on their way home. Rigby asks what they do. Muscle Man says to get up there and put that kid to bed or he'll haunt them for the rest of their lives. Mordecai and Rigby are seen walking around trying to find Thomas. They call his name. They enter a room where Thomas is moving around. Mordecai tells Thomas to get down from there. Rigby says Thomas promised he'd go to bed after he ate. Thomas says, Dad always reads him a story before bed. He drops down onto the floor and tells them to regale him with a story. Mordecai says, okay, and grabs a book off the shelf, saying, Once upon a time. Thomas says, not that book, and points behind Mordecai to another book. Mordecai and Rigby turn to see a book that is being held up by skeleton hands and is engulfed in flames. The camera zooms in on it. Mordecai says he's not sure that's a good idea. Thomas says it is a terrific idea. Muscle Man says just read it and that it's starting to smell like body odor in here for some reason. A clock transition shows Mordecai, Rigby, and Thomas sitting on the couch. Mordecai is getting ready to read Thomas the story. Mordecai reads the book title, The Hungry, Hungry, Soul-Sucking Death Worm. He continues reading that the hungry, hungry, soul-sucking death worm was so hungry. Thomas tells him to pull the tab. Mordecai pulls the tab. Mordecai reads that the worm searched far and wide for souls to eat, but only got hungrier. Thomas says this is the most boring part of the book, and it gets much better. The scene skips ahead to where Mordecai is almost done reading the book. Mordecai reads that once all the souls were eaten, the worm took a nice long nap. The end. He looks up, saying that was a pretty good book. Thomas says, no, wait. Mordecai forgot to pull the last tab. The camera zooms in on the tab. Mordecai hesitates. Thomas yells to pull it, saying this is his favorite part. Mordecai asks what's the point because the book's over. Thomas says, annoyed, that if Mordecai doesn't, he won't go to bed. Mordecai and Rigby then pull the tab, releasing a real-life, soul-sucking death worm, which breaks the table in front of them. Mordecai and Rigby scream and run away while Thomas claps. Thomas tells them not to be afraid. Just feed it. Mordecai asks what they feed it. Thomas says souls. He tries to teleport Muscle Man out of the amulet. Muscle Man yells. The death worm roars happily when it sees Muscle Man. Rigby screams in fear and runs away with Mordecai as the hungry creature comes towards Muscle Man. He keeps running and turns around only to see the death worm right behind him. He quickly thinks of an idea and takes off the amulet. Rigby yells for Mordecai to catch. Rigby throws the amulet and barely avoids getting bitten by the death worm. Muscle Man screams as he is hurled through the air. Mordecai manages to catch the amulet, which makes the death worm start to chase after him instead. As it turns, its tail hits Rigby in the face, causing Rigby to be flung into a TV. Thomas asks what they're doing and tells them to give the worm the fat man's soul. He climbs up Mordecai in an attempt to get the amulet. Mordecai yells. Thomas bites Mordecai's arm, causing Mordecai to drop the amulet. Mordecai yells that it hurts. The amulet rolls away. Mordecai tells Thomas to knock it off. The death worm smiles as it sees Muscle Man, and Thomas laughs with glee. Before Muscle Man can be eaten, however, Rigby rolls by and snatches up the amulet. Rigby says he got it. He rolls out of the way right before the death worm eats him. He asks Mordecai for a little help. Mordecai runs to catch up with Rigby. Mordecai says they have to get the worm back in the book. Rigby tosses the amulet and tells Mordecai to take Muscle Man because he's got a plan. He runs away. Mordecai calls for Rigby. Rigby slides into the living room and grabs the book. Meanwhile, Mordecai is shown running away from the death worm as Thomas follows in hot pursuit, laughing. Mordecai then runs up a flight of stairs, causing the death worm to chase him. Thomas says no, this is not how it is written, and that the worm must eat the soul. He throws a piece of wood at Mordecai. Mordecai ducks and says, "No way to the bloodthirsty little jerk." He continues to run away as the death worm appears right behind him. Rigby then runs back into the room with the book in his hands. Rigby tells Mordecai to throw Muscle Man over to Thomas. Mordecai is shown running up the flight of stairs again. He stops when he hears Rigby say this. Mordecai asks what, because Thomas will just feed Muscle Man to the worm. The worm roars in response. Rigby tells him to trust him. Muscle Man says Mordecai better not do it. Mordecai says, "Sorry, Muscle Man." He throws the amulet over to Thomas, which confuses the death worm. Muscle Man screams in anguish. Thomas says he will feed it himself if he needs to. The amulet lands into his open hands. Thomas reacts with confusion. The death worm then proceeds to jump down the flight of stairs in order to get to Muscle Man. Thomas says, "That's not what he meant." Right before the death worm can eat Muscle Man's soul, Rigby jumps in front of Thomas with the open book. Rigby screams as the death worm starts to get sucked back into the book, and Mordecai picks up Thomas and the amulet. The death worm has its tail wrapped around a chandelier, but that does not stop it from getting pulled back into the book. Rigby then closes the book in success. Mordecai says, "Nice." Rigby's face has been messed up from the force of the worm getting sucked back into the book, but he says thanks. Muscle Man says he thinks he's going to hurl. Thomas says, upset. That was an awful story time. Rigby says angrily that they read him the story, so now go to sleep. Thomas says he could have been killed and he's never going to sleep. Never, ever. He tells them to look at the time. The camera zooms in on a clock which shows it's almost 8 p.m. Mordecai and Rigby gasp. Thomas says Mommy and Daddy will be back any minute now, and when they see him wide awake, they'll go ballistic. Footsteps are heard right outside the door. Mordecai and Rigby gasp in fear. Thomas starts laughing, only to be silenced when the chandelier falls on top of him. Mordecai and Rigby grimace. Mordecai says worried that they're so dead. Rigby says hopefully that Thomas could be all right. The door opens. Death says, "They're back," then gasps, asking, "What happened here?" The camera follows Death as he walks around and points out everything. Broken furniture all over the place, fires everywhere, his favorite harp ruined. Unbelievable! He walks back over to Mordecai and Rigby and is furious with them for the destruction of his house. He asks what about Thomas? Rigby hesitates. Death's wife calls for Thomas. She lifts up the chandelier and says he's out cold. She walks back over to Death and thanks him for a perfect anniversary. She kisses Death and walks away with Thomas. Death says, "Right!" and points at Mordecai and Rigby. They are the best babysitters they've ever had. They certainly did better than the last few. He holds up his hand, which has 3 rings with the last few babysitters' souls inside. He says he's impressed and was sure they'd perish. Mordecai says, "Yeah, thanks, but they know what they want." He holds up the amulet. Rigby says to bring Muscle Man back. Death says, "All right, fine. A deal's a deal." Death teleports Muscle Man out of the amulet, which also brings Muscle Man back to his original size. Muscle Man cheers and swings his shirt over his head until he realizes it is now too small to put back on. A clock transition shows Mordecai, Rigby, and Muscle Man standing outside of Death's house. Death says, "It's not easy juggling a full-time job and raising a family, so they shouldn't expect it to be so easy to get one of their souls back next time. Which will be soon, what with Muscle Man entering that hot dog eating contest." Mordecai, Rigby, and Muscle Man laugh. Death says, "Seriously, Muscle Man is going to die in a hot dog eating contest." He walks away and closes the door. Rigby asks how they get home. The episode ends. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Death Bear, Season 3, Episode 36. Death Bear is disturbing because it takes a simple movie night and transforms it into a nightmare where a mythical killer bear turns out to be real, invades their home, and brutally attacks animal control officers, including slicing one officer's arms completely off with his claws. The episode aired during Season 3 and shows what happens when Rigby convinces the group to visit an abandoned zoo to prove Mordecai isn't scared of an urban legend called Death Bear. What makes this episode particularly unsettling is how the creature goes from campfire story to genuine threat in seconds, and the shocking violence when Death Bear effortlessly defeats trained professionals sent to stop him, while the group watches in terror from the stairs. The episode opens with a close-up of the floor in Pop's house. Mordecai announces movie night. Rigby dumps a box of DVDs on the floor saying, "Let's see what they've got." Mordecai picks up Love by the Dozen. Rigby reacts with disgust, asking if it's a romantic comedy, and vetoes it, tossing the movie somewhere else. Eileen holds up a DVD titled Cease and Desist, asking, "What about this one?" and saying it looks creepy. The camera does a close-up on Cease and Desist. Mordecai says no scary stuff because Rigby can't handle it. Rigby asks, "What?" Mordecai reminds him about the time they saw Dead for breakfast, and Rigby wouldn't eat pancakes for a week. Rigby says he was sleeping in that week. Mordecai imitates Rigby, saying, "Oh no, the bacon is going to get me." Mordecai, Margaret, and Eileen all laugh. Rigby says Mordecai is the bacon. Margaret asks if they have anything with adventure. Mordecai says, "Let's see." Rigby says, "Forget movies, and that they should go on a real adventure." Mordecai, Margaret, and Eileen react with confusion. Rigby says, "Yeah, to the old abandoned park zoo." Mordecai says, "Come on, it's movie night, and they should stay inside and veg out on the couch." Rigby says Mordecai is just afraid they'll run into Death Bear. Margaret and Eileen ask, "Death Bear?" Rigby asks if they've never heard of Death Bear. Margaret says no. Rigby tells them to gather around. Mordecai grunts heavily. Rigby explains the tale of Death Bear is a tale that's as old as 15 to 20 years ago. He was a troubled bear that lived in the park zoo who was evil to the core. One day, out of nowhere, he attacked and killed his trainer. The zoo was forced to close down, but Death Bear wouldn't leave, so he still roams the old abandoned zoo, getting more evil over the years, only to be able to survive by breaking into people's homes, eating all of their food, and then eating them. Margaret and Eileen react with amazement. Mordecai says that's lame and Death Bear is a dumb old urban legend. He says story time is over and to get this movie started. Mordecai picks up a bowl of popcorn on the coffee table and sniffs it, saying semi-burnt popcorn. He tells Margaret he saved her a seat right here and pats the cushion of the couch. Rigby says, "See? He told them Mordecai is scared of Death Bear." Mordecai asks what, and says Death Bear isn't even real, asking if Margaret knows he's not scared. Margaret says it's all right, and if Mordecai doesn't want to go, it does sound pretty scary. Mordecai says, "What? No, it's just that it's supposed to be movie night." Rigby says, excuses, and that if Mordecai is not scared of Death Bear, then he dares him to take a picture inside Death Bear's cage. Margaret and Eileen react. Mordecai says, "No, that's just dumb." Margaret says, "Come on, it will be an exciting adventure." Eileen says, "Yeah, and all desolate and spooky." Margaret tells Eileen they are trying to make him not scared. Mordecai yells he's not scared. Margaret, Eileen, and Rigby all start to murmur, and Mordecai lets out a deep sigh. He says, "Okay, fine. They'll go to the abandoned zoo and take a picture in a dumb bear cage." Margaret celebrates. Eileen says this is going to be fun. Rigby runs upstairs saying he'll get the camera. Margaret tells Mordecai they'll watch a movie another night, she promises. Mordecai says they better. Margaret pushes Mordecai in the shoulder, calling him such a pouter. Margaret giggles. Rigby slides down the stair rail with a camera, yelling, "Death Bear!" An echo approaches when Rigby yells, "Death Bear!" The scene transitions to the gang at the abandoned zoo. Rigby says, "There it is." Eileen says, "Neat," and puts her head into the mouth of a lion statue, saying, "Check it out. She's a lion tamer." Mordecai and Rigby stare at her in confusion. Margaret struggles to get the gate open, saying, "It's locked." Eileen climbs on top of the lion statue, saying, "Aw, man." Rigby runs to the gate, saying, "No way." Mordecai says, "Oh well, he guesses it wasn't meant to be, but they still have enough time for movie night." He suggests going back. Rigby says, "Hey, he found a way in." Margaret runs to the hole in the gate that Rigby found, saying, "Cool." Eileen says, "Way to go, Rigby." Mordecai says, "Wait," but gets cut off. Margaret asks if he's coming. Rigby imitates Margaret, asking if Mordecai is coming. Mordecai says, "Rigby is enjoying this." Rigby confirms with a laugh. Mordecai and Rigby go through the hole in the gate. Then the scene transitions to them in the park zoo. Rigby says, "Cool." Eileen says, "It is so weird without any animals." Margaret says, "Yeah, it's like the end of the world or something." Mordecai asks if she's not afraid. Margaret says, "Yeah, right, Mordecai is the big chicken here." Mordecai asks, "What?" The gang finds the reptile house. Rigby says, "Oh yeah, reptile building," and asks if Mordecai can handle going in there. Mordecai says to step aside. The gang is now inside the reptile house. Eileen asks if they think Death Bear is real. Rigby says, "Heck yeah, he's real, and he's probably waiting for them on the other side of this building." Mordecai says, "No, he's not, and there's no one here." A squirrel comes out of a broken reptile tank. Mordecai screams and falls on his butt. Rigby laughs hysterically. Eileen says, "How cute!" Rigby says, maybe he should take the lead because there might be more squirrels up ahead. Rigby and Eileen run off, leaving Mordecai and Margaret by themselves. Margaret helps Mordecai up, asking if he's okay. Mordecai says, "Yeah, he's fine."
Mordecai and Margaret exit the reptile house.
Margaret asks if he's sure he can handle Death Bear because that squirrel was pretty scary back there. Mordecai says he wasn't scared, he was just surprised, and there's a difference. Margaret says, "Oh yeah, sure, he looked pretty scared to her." She says, "Boo!" Mordecai responds sarcastically and rolls his eyes at Margaret. He says, "No, seriously though, they actually came to the zoo a couple of times when they were kids." Margaret says, "Cool." Mordecai says, "Yeah, it was pretty cool, and the only thing he didn't like was the bear." Margaret asks, "So he is scared of Death Bear?" and giggles. Mordecai says, Well, yeah, when he was little, but it was just a regular bear, though. Mordecai sees something that catches his attention, saying, "No way! He totally remembers this. The thing is a little ride-along train that is abandoned along with the rest of the zoo. One car is seen laying sideways on the platform of the station. Mordecai runs toward it, saying, this was his favorite part about coming to the zoo. He puts his hands on the roof of the locomotive, saying he loved riding this train. The conductor would yell, 'All aboard!' and he would race to get the first seat he could. Mordecai runs toward a train car and sits in it, letting out a breath of relaxation. Margaret walks up to the train car Mordecai is sitting in, saying, 'Sounds like a good time,' and telling him to scoot. Margaret sits with Mordecai, saying, 'It's kind of small.' Mordecai offers to get out. Margaret says no, she doesn't mind, and it's cozy. Mordecai says, 'Oh yeah.' Margaret asks where they're going. Mordecai pretends to talk to a conductor while trying to imitate a man with his wife from the 1920s, telling the conductor to take them somewhere exotic, please, and to mind the bumps because his lady does not like getting ill. Mordecai and Margaret laugh until it starts to get into back and forth sounds until they are both silent. Margaret has a huge smile on her face when staring at Mordecai. Then, out of nowhere, Rigby comes and kills the moment by yelling from a window, asking them to come over because they found some more train tracks. The scene transitions to the gang walking on the newly found train tracks. The gang eventually finds a metal tunnel. Eileen says rad and tells everybody to scream through the tunnel. Eileen and Rigby scream through the tunnel. Mordecai says after Margaret. Margaret says what a gentleman and screams through the tunnel, then laughs with Eileen on the other side. She asks where Mordecai is and faces the tunnel calling for him. Mordecai yells for Margaret. Margaret screams. Mordecai laughs. Margaret asks what he's doing. Mordecai says he went around. Margaret tells him not to do that and shoves Mordecai in anger. Mordecai asks what and says it's funny. The gang follows the train tracks again, only to discover that the metal rails have been pulled up, leading them to a dead end. Rigby reacts with disappointment. Margaret asks which way now? Rigby and Eileen look around. Eileen finds something on the ground, telling them to check it out. It turns out to be a footprint of something large. Margaret walks over to it, asking if that's a footprint. Eileen says it's huge. Mordecai and Rigby walk over to it. Mordecai says, "Nah, it can't be. It's just a hole in the dirt." Rigby says, "No, man, it's Death Bear," and points them this way. The gang walks over to a bear cage that has a huge hole in the bars, the same size as the hole in the gate earlier. Eileen says she thinks they found it. Rigby says, "Yeah, that's definitely it." The gang walks through the hole into the bear cage. Mordecai says, "Okay, well, they're here. Let's take the picture and go." Rigby says, "Oh no, this is just the entrance, and anybody can take a picture here. They are going to the real cage down through there." Rigby turns around and points to a small door in the back of the cage that is open. Margaret and Eileen react with surprise. Mordecai says, "No way, they're not going down there." Rigby asks why not and says he thought Mordecai wasn't scared. Rigby opens the door with a sinister laugh. Mordecai says Rigby's name in frustration. Eileen asks, well. Margaret asks if Mordecai is coming. Mordecai, Margaret, and Eileen go through the door. Mordecai calls for Rigby. Rigby says, "Whoa, awesome!" Rigby runs down an aisle of various bear cages. Mordecai asks where Rigby is. Rigby calls from off-screen to hurry up. Eileen looks inside a cage as she is passing by that holds a stray bone. She says it feels like they shouldn't be in here. Margaret tells Rigby to come on. Rigby says from off-screen he's not stopping until he finds Death Bear. Mordecai tells him to quit messing around. Rigby laughs from a long distance. Mordecai says, "Forget it, they're going back." Mordecai, Margaret, and Eileen are 1 second on their way back, only to hear Rigby screaming. They all call for Rigby and race down to the end, hoping to save him. Mordecai calls for Rigby repeatedly. Rigby is on the other side of a wall. He jumps right in front of the gang with a loud scream. It scares them so much that Mordecai and Margaret are holding each other, and all three of them fall down. Despite all of this, Rigby is laughing hysterically. Mordecai asks, "What the heck?" Rigby says they should have seen their faces and that they really believed. He laughs again. Margaret says he almost gave them heart attacks. Eileen says they thought Death Bear got him. Rigby laughs hysterically and says Death Bear's not real, it's just a myth, and they totally fell for it. Mordecai says whatever and asks if they can go back to the house now. Rigby says sure, but let's take the picture first. Rigby sets the camera on a rock and sets the timer. The gang lines up for a picture. Rigby says, "Okay, get ready." Eileen asks what this door is for, referring to a metal door that is in back of them. Rigby says he doesn't know, he's not a zookeeper. The camera captures the moment and takes a picture.
The picture comes out through the slot of the camera.
Rigby says, "Sweet," and that he got them good. Mordecai says, Yeah. Mordecai and Margaret walk off, leaving Rigby and Eileen alone. Eileen says, "Well, Rigby got her good." Rigby says, "Yeah, Death Bear's really going to be living down here." Rigby knocks on the metal door, pretending that Death Bear is in there, asking if he's home. Rigby and Eileen let out a small laugh. Eileen knocks on the door, saying, "The pizzas Death Bear ordered are here." Rigby and Eileen let out a small laugh. Margaret tells Mordecai he was holding her pretty tight for someone who is not scared. Mordecai says, "What? No, she was totally holding on to him." Mordecai and Margaret let out a small laugh. Rigby is shaking the developed photo, trying to make it appear, saying, "These things take forever to show up." Eileen says, "Actually, you're not supposed to shake it." Rigby asks if she knows what this piece does, pointing to the lens of the camera. Eileen says, "Yeah, you just turn it like this." Eileen turns the knob on the lens. The metal door that Rigby and Eileen were knocking on opens very slowly. Margaret asks if Mordecai still wishes he was just watching a movie. Mordecai says no. This was pretty fun because he got to hang out with her, so that's all that matters. Margaret lets out a small laugh. Mordecai leans over, hoping to kiss Margaret. Margaret says Mordecai's name. Mordecai responds. Margaret pulls his head over to her lips, hoping to kiss Mordecai, but then she notices something in back of him. She asks what that is. Mordecai reacts with confusion. It turns out that the door really did hold Death Bear, and he is making an appearance, creeping through the door, disgruntled as Rigby described him back at the house. Eileen and Rigby let out whimpers. Death Bear lets out a huge growl, showing his breath, which knocks off Rigby's orange beanie hat. They both step back towards Mordecai and Margaret. Death Bear lets out a huge growl, scaring them. They run out, hoping to lose him. Rigby yells that Death Bear's real. Mordecai says he's going to kill Rigby for this. Eileen says she thinks Death Bear is going to take care of that. Margaret tells her to quit it and not say that. The gang is still in hot pursuit, running through the hole in the cage. Death Bear fits through perfectly, stating that Death Bear was the one who made it. They keep running until they get back up to the house. The gang runs through the door and Mordecai slams the door shut, trying to block Death Bear from coming in. This is unsuccessful as Death Bear uses his pickelhaube on his head to try to charge in the door. Mordecai backs away with the rest of the gang. Mordecai yells, "Quick, everybody barricade the door." Mordecai, Margaret, and Rigby go look for furniture to barricade the door with. Eileen says she'll call Animal Control. Eileen goes to a nearby phone and punches in the number for Animal Control. Meanwhile, Margaret and Rigby use a cabinet to barricade the door, and Mordecai uses a bookshelf. Death Bear demolishes the entire front entrance, knocking Margaret and Rigby to a corner, and Mordecai trapped underneath the bookshelf. Death Bear then sees Eileen on the phone with Animal Control. The Animal Control operator says, "Hello, Animal Control, hello?" Death Bear then moves in. He walks toward Eileen. Meanwhile, Rigby is with Margaret in a corner, squealing. Mordecai gasps and says Eileen's name. Mordecai lifts the bookshelf and frees himself. He runs toward Eileen while Death Bear is creeping up on her. Eileen is still on the phone, whimpering in fear. Suddenly, Death Bear charges toward Eileen, hoping to kill her. But out of nowhere, Mordecai tackles Death Bear so hard that Death Bear goes right through a wall. Margaret now has an expression on her face. Eileen is still on the phone with Animal Control, saying, "Yes, come quick, it's Death Bear." Mordecai yells for everyone upstairs quick. The gang runs up the stairs. Death Bear is on the bottom, growling at them. Eileen says Animal Control is on its way. 2 Animal Control officers charge in through the kitchen door with tranquilizer guns aimed at Death Bear. Animal Control Officer number 1 says it's Death Bear and to take him down. They both rapidly fire at Death Bear, but none of the tranquilizer bullets are powerful enough to knock out Death Bear. Death Bear then judo kicks one officer and then roundhouses another officer. Meanwhile, another officer jumps from a rope only to have Death Bear slice his arms off with his claws. Animal Control Officer number 2 says he wants to go home. Death Bear then throws another officer onto the balcony where the gang is. Mordecai picks it up and tries to get the safety latch off, accidentally shooting Rigby with a tranquilizer bullet in the process. Rigby speaks in slow-motion voice, asking, "What the heck?" Mordecai says, "Sorry." Death Bear lets out a huge growl, then charges up the stairs. Mordecai screams his head off and is sweating crazy trying to take down Death Bear by rapidly firing at him. It doesn't work, even though 30 bullets went in his face. Death Bear makes it to the top of the stairs. Mordecai, who is still screaming and sweating, tries to take him down. Finally, Death Bear has enough tranquilizer in his system to knock him out. Mordecai tries to catch his breath. The scene transitions to them outside the next morning, watching Death Bear being airlifted by helicopter to an animal sanctuary. Eileen says, "Poor Death Bear." Mordecai tells her not to worry about him because he'll be fine. Those animal sanctuaries are like 5-star hotels. Margaret says, "Hey, so thanks for saving all of their lives and stuff, and that was really brave of him." Mordecai says, "To be honest, he was pretty scared." Margaret says, "Yeah, but that's what made him brave." She says, "Well, she'll see him later." Margaret hugs Mordecai. Mordecai says, "Yeah, cool." Eileen tells Rigby he wasn't exactly brave, but he is pretty cool. Rigby speaks in slow motion, saying, "Thanks, her too." Margaret asks how that picture turned out. Rigby takes out the picture, but it shows that he only took a picture of their feet. Mordecai reacts with disappointment. Mordecai, Margaret, and Eileen all say Rigby's name in frustration. The episode ends. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Terror Tales of the Park 2, Season 4, Episode 3. Terror Tales of the Park 2 is disturbing because it takes a simple drive to a Halloween party and transforms it into an anthology of nightmares, featuring a zombie uncle crawling out of a television, a party bus that ages passengers to death and then reverses them into non-existence, and a giant spider disguised as a wallpaper installer who wraps victims in silk and swallows Muscle Man whole. The episode aired during Season 4 and shows the park workers dressed in Halloween costumes, telling scary stories while lost on the way to a party. What makes this episode particularly unsettling is how each story escalates in horror, from a guilt-driven haunting to rapid aging and death to a home invasion by a monstrous spider that transforms their house into a death trap labyrinth. The episode begins in Skip's car driving through the woods. The 8 groundskeepers are all dressed in Halloween costumes. Muscle Man is dressed like Abraham Lincoln and says he can't wait to get to the party. He talks to High Five Ghost, who is wearing a fake mustache, saying it's going to be all like, "What's up, Mr. President?" He laughs and they high-five each other. Muscle Man says, "You know who else is like, 'What's up, Mr. President?' and answers his mom. Benson is dressed like a pirate and tells Muscle Man, "That's enough." Pops is dressed like a mummy and asks if they think there will be snacks. Mordecai is dressed like Frankenstein's monster and says it's the biggest Halloween party in town, so they'll have all the candy Pops can eat. Rigby is dressed like Beef Burrito and says, "Yeah, but all the good stuff will be gone before they get there. This drive is taking forever." Benson says the map says it should be right around here. Muscle Man tells Thomas to stop reading a map wrong because he's going to get them lost. Thomas is dressed like Lone Ranger and says he doesn't even have the map. Muscle Man tells him to shut it and asks what he told Thomas about talking to him. Benson tells Muscle Man to leave Thomas alone because he's just an intern and it's bad enough he doesn't get paid. Thomas asks if they're getting paid. Skips is dressed like Dracula and asks Benson if he's sure he knows where they're going because he hasn't seen a house for miles. Benson says it's fine and he knows what he's doing. He flips his eye patch to the other eye. Rigby groans, saying he's dying of boredom back here. Pops suggests they could pass the time with a game of I Spy. Rigby says no way because Pops got carsick the last time they played that. Mordecai says he knows and suggests scary stories. Rigby agrees enthusiastically. Benson says no because Pops can't handle it. Pops says nonsense, he'll be fine. Benson says okay, but if Pops gets scared, Mordecai and Rigby are in serious trouble. Rigby says yeah. Mordecai says, "All right," and that it all started at the bowling alley on a dark and stormy night. The story fades to Stardust Lanes, where Mordecai, Rigby, Muscle Man, High Five Ghost, and Steve, Mordecai's uncle, are playing a bowling match. Mordecai bowls a strike and celebrates. That it's game. Uncle Steve congratulates him. Muscle Man says forget this because Mordecai already won 3 games in a row, and his weirdo uncle is making him uncomfortable with his lame tie. Uncle Steve says he's just dressing for the occasion and tells Muscle Man not to act like he's not jealous of this. He pulls his tie and it lights up. Muscle Man tells High Five Ghost to bail. Rigby agrees they should go. Mordecai asks for one more game, asking if they're afraid to lose. Muscle Man says no way. Rigby says it's on. Mordecai asks Uncle Steve if he's down to play another game. Uncle Steve says he doesn't know because he's kind of low on funds and this tie wasn't cheap. Mordecai says it's cool and that he's got $5. Uncle Steve says he couldn't. Mordecai tells him not to worry about it and that he can pay him back later because Mordecai knows he's good for it. Uncle Steve says okay and promises he'll get Mordecai back. Mordecai hands Uncle Steve his $5 and celebrates. He bumps into Uncle Steve and his tie gets stuck in the ball return. Uncle Steve says his tie. Mordecai calls for Uncle Steve. Uncle Steve screams as he gets sucked into the ball return. The scene cuts to show a tree branch being fed into a wood chipper, and then shows Mordecai and Rigby at Uncle Steve's grave. Mordecai says he can't believe he's gone, and this is all his fault. If he hadn't pressured everybody to play that extra game, his uncle would still be alive. Rigby tells him not to talk like that because life just does its thing. If Rigby were Mordecai, he'd be more upset about losing the $5. Mordecai punches him. Rigby says, "Ow." Mordecai says, "Not helping." The scene shows Mordecai in his bed at night saying it's all his fault. Inside Mordecai's dream, he is with Uncle Steve, handing him $5 like what happened before. He bumps into Uncle Steve, who gets sucked into the ball return like before. Uncle Steve asks why Mordecai had to play another game and then is disintegrated. Mordecai yells no and wakes up. He calls for Rigby, then sees dead Uncle Steve and screams. He rubs his eyes, hoping it was just an illusion. Going into the bathroom to wash his face, he sees dead Uncle Steve in the mirror. Mordecai tells himself to get a hold of himself because all the guilt is making him see things. It's not real. He glances up and sees dead Uncle Steve in the mirror again and screams. He runs down the hall into the living room where all the Pops portraits turn into dead Uncle Steve portraits. Mordecai yells for Rigby, saying he can't stop seeing his dead uncle. Rigby says, "Me either." Uncle Steve calls for Morty. Mordecai and Rigby scream. Uncle Steve lights his tie up and crawls out the television set. Mordecai and Rigby keep screaming and run out of the house. Rigby says he thought Mordecai's uncle was dead. Mordecai says he is. Uncle Steve is seen running after them. Mordecai and Rigby run into the cemetery asking if they lost him. They trip onto Uncle Steve's grave and scream. Uncle Steve growls, then coughs. He says he bets Mordecai thought he forgot, but here you go. He gives Mordecai money. Rigby says it's Mordecai's $5. Uncle Steve says a promise is a promise. Mordecai says, "Wow, thanks, Uncle Steve." Uncle Steve says, "No problem, and to take care now." Steve growls as he burrows into the dirt. The story ends and Mordecai says, "The end." Benson asks, "What's wrong with him?" Mordecai asks, "What?" Benson says, "Just look at Pops." Pops says, "Scared?" That it's all right, he's fine, really, while shaking. The phone rings and Pops screams. Rigby tells Pops to chill because it's just the phone. Mordecai says he's going to take this and answers the phone. Margaret calls for Mordecai. Mordecai says, "Hey, Margaret." Margaret says they just got to the party and asks if they're inside. Mordecai says, "No, actually they're still driving because they got a little lost." Margaret says, "That's a bummer." Mordecai says it's cool though because they've been telling scary stories. Margaret says scary stories and that she's got a good one, telling him to put her on speakerphone. Mordecai puts Margaret on speakerphone and announces she's going to tell a story. Benson says, "It better not be scary." Margaret says, "Don't worry, it's a funny one," and that it all started when they were getting into the cart to go to a Halloween movie. The story starts with Mordecai, Rigby, Margaret, and Eileen getting into the cart dressed up in costumes. Mordecai celebrates Halloween movie time. Rigby calls shotgun. They're about to hop in the cart, but Benson and Skips stop them. Benson asks what they think they're doing. Rigby says, going to the movies. Benson says no they're not, because they need that cart to patrol delinquents toilet papering the park. Mordecai asks how they're going to get to the theater because Margaret's car is in the shop. Benson says, not his problem. Two punks appear who have already toilet papered the trees. They taunt Benson. Benson tells Skips to roll and they drive away. Margaret says she guesses that's it because there's no way they'll make it there in time now. Mordecai says they can't give up yet. Eileen says she'll call a taxi. Mordecai says there's still some time and they'll probably just miss the previews. Eileen is on the phone and says thank you, hanging up to say they said 10 minutes. A bus shows up. Mordecai says that was fast. Rigby says he thought Eileen called a taxi. The bus driver asks if they need a ride. Mordecai asks if he could take them to the movie theater downtown. The bus driver says he'll take them wherever they need to go, telling them to climb aboard the party bus and join the party. Rigby says, cool. Rigby and Eileen run inside the bus. Mordecai says, see, nothing to worry about. Margaret agrees. Mordecai and Margaret walk inside the bus, and there's a sign that says, the party's killer. The bus drives out of the park and a taxi pulls up. Inside the bus, there are other people partying. Someone welcomes them to the party bus. Everyone yells, "Party bus!" Mordecai, Rigby, and Eileen celebrate. Mordecai and Eileen are dancing and Rigby is eating snacks. Mordecai calls to Margaret. Margaret says, "This is crazy." Mordecai says he knows, right? Eileen comments, "There's some great costumes in here." Margaret says, "Yeah, there must have been a huge sale on white wigs or something." Mordecai offers Margaret soda. Margaret thanks him, then gasps, telling Mordecai to look. They notice a couple of people getting older. Margaret asks if they're all right. A party guy says, "Oh yeah, they're cool," and just partied a little too hard, he guesses. Mordecai and Margaret laugh. The party guy yells, "Party bus!" Mordecai agrees while laughing and says, "See, isn't this great?" Margaret says, "He's right," and yells, "Party bus!" While they continue dancing, Margaret notices that they passed the movie theater. Margaret tells the driver to stop the bus and let them off. The bus driver just ignores her and turns up the music. Margaret tells Mordecai, "The bus isn't stopping." The party guy says in an elder voice that they can't stop now because the party's just getting started. Mordecai says, "The guy doesn't look so good." Rigby asks how long he's been here. The party guy says, 15 minutes, then disintegrates. The four scream in shock. Margaret says, "Those weren't white wigs, and everybody's getting older." Eileen gasps and tells Mordecai to look at his face. Mordecai asks, "What?" and is shown all wrinkled up. Margaret says in an elder voice that he's getting older. Mordecai says in an elder voice that so is she. Margaret is now wrinkled up. Rigby is starting to get wrinkled up, and Eileen takes off her glasses while she is all wrinkled up. Mordecai says they need to get off this bus now. The bus driver says, "You can't stop the party bus once it's started," asking, "Right, everybody?" The four look behind them, showing that all the citizens are now turned into dust. The bus driver asks, "What's that saying again?" and answers, "Party till you drop." His wrappings come off, revealing he's a skeleton who laughs evilly. They all scream. The bus driver speeds the bus up and the gang get pushed away. Margaret tells Eileen in an elder voice to help her with the door. The bus driver continues to laugh evilly. Margaret says it won't open. Mordecai yells in an elder voice to stop the bus. He throws the bus driver, who breaks apart while still laughing. Mordecai gets in the driver's seat and stomps on the brakes, but the bus doesn't stop. Rigby tells him in an elder voice to try the emergency brake. Mordecai pulls the emergency brake and it breaks off. Desperately searching around for another way, he shifts the stick into reverse and the bus stops, which results with the dust from all the citizens landing on Rigby, Margaret, and Eileen. Mordecai says in an elder voice, "Well, at least they still have something," but gets cut off. The bus starts going again but goes in reverse. Margaret asks in an elder voice why he put it in reverse. Mordecai says in an elder voice it was the only thing he could think of. Rigby looks at his hands, returning to their real age, and tells the others to look. Margaret says they're getting younger. But the de-aging doesn't stop since the bus is still in motion. The gang starts shrinking, turning them younger until they're kids again. Mordecai says in a younger voice they have to get off this bus. Eileen says in a younger voice to look at an emergency hatch. She points at a hatch in the roof. Mordecai says in a younger voice for everybody to come up. Rigby opens the hatch. Mordecai lifts everyone on top of the bus, but when Mordecai finally gets out, he notices they all have turned into babies. Rigby, Margaret, and Eileen ask in younger voices now what? Mordecai says in a younger voice they have to jump. The gang holds each other's hands and then they all jump off the bus, giggling. Mordecai says they did it and got off the party bus. They all celebrate. They all pop out of existence. As the party bus falls apart, the bus driver's maniacal laughter is heard. The driver's laughter is quickly replaced with Margaret's. Rigby asks if that was supposed to be funny. Margaret says, yeah, the party's killer, asking if they get it. Pops is trembling and Benson gets angry. Margaret asks if Mordecai is there. Mordecai says he has to go and he'll see her there. He hangs up the phone. Benson says that's it. No more stories from anyone. Mordecai and Rigby protest. Rigby tells Benson not to act like this is all their fault, because if Benson hadn't gotten them lost, they wouldn't be telling stories. Benson yells, "Don't make him make Skips turn this van around." Rigby tells Skips not to make Benson make him turn the van around because Rigby has to go to this party. Skips tells them to knock it off. A truck gets in their way, and there's a close-up of them screaming. The scene cuts to black. A tow truck pulls Skip's car out of a tree. The group is alive, but not all are happy. Benson says he hopes they're proud of themselves and to look where their scary stories got them now. Rigby says Skips should have watched where he was going. Benson yells to just get in the tow truck. Rigby says okay. Benson tells the tow truck guy they need to get to a party, but they're running late, asking if he minds dropping them off. The tow truck guy says, "No problem, Chief." The gang gets on the road again until they get stuck in traffic. Rigby says this is going to take forever and asks if anyone has another story. Mordecai agrees. Benson asks if they're kidding him because they just got in an accident. Pops is scared half to death, and they want to tell more stories. Pops says actually, he wouldn't mind hearing one more tale. Muscle Man says, yeah, they've been pretty good. Thomas says he's down. Skip says it would be nice to hear one while he's not driving. Rigby tells Benson that even Skips wants to hear one. Benson says fine, but this time he's telling the story. Rigby protests. Benson says now pay attention because they just might learn something. The story starts with Mordecai and Rigby exiting their room laughing. Rigby says pickles and chuckles. Benson throws wallpaper equipment at them. Rigby says to watch it. Mordecai asks what all this is. Benson says they're re-wallpapering the house today. Mordecai and Rigby ask why. Benson says because of that. There's a drawing of Rigby saying this job is like prison, and a drawing of Mordecai saying he found a way out, pointing to a hole in the wall. Mordecai and Rigby laugh. Rigby asks how Benson knows it was them. Benson groans. Mordecai says, okay, fine. They'll just patch up that one spot. Benson says no, they can't, because that wallpaper is discontinued, so they have to do the whole house with new stuff so it all matches. Rigby says they don't even know how to wallpaper walls. Benson throws instructions at them and says to just follow the instructions and make it nice, or they're doing it over again. Rigby complains Benson didn't have to throw the equipment at them. Benson says off-screen that yes, he did. Rigby reads the instructions, confused about whether to smooth the glue paste before applying the paper or smooth the paper and apply the glue paste. Mordecai asks, what? Rigby says he doesn't know because these don't make any sense. Mordecai says he hates wallpapering and wishes they could get someone else to do it. The TV slides into the hallway with them. A commercial plays with Jan asking if they hate wallpapering and trying to do it yourself, but the instructions just don't make sense. Mordecai asks Rigby if he turned on the TV. Rigby says no. Jan introduces himself as Jan the Wallpaper Man, saying he's here to do away with all wallpaper problems. Nobody likes wallpapering, not even him. He's just been doing it for over 40 years and has gotten pretty darn good at it. He'll deal with all the headaches. Rigby says, yeah, if only they had $1 million. Jan says off-screen, now they're probably thinking, yeah, if only they had $1 million. And normally they'd be right. But with Jan, the wallpaper man, the first job's free. Mordecai and Rigby ask, "What?" Jan says that's right. He'll wallpaper their whole house for free, but in return, he only asks that for their next wallpaper job, they call old Jan here first. A free job for first dibs on their second job sounds like a good deal, right? He tells them to call the number and he'll wallpaper their house. He really will. The TV turns off. Muscle Man shows up asking why the TV is in the hallway. Mordecai asks Muscle Man if he ever orders stuff off the TV. Muscle Man says for sure, especially if it's a local business. He once bought some replica hand grenades from an army dude off the TV, and it turns out they were the real deal. Mordecai says no way. Muscle Man asks if they remember when the shed exploded last week and he said it was lightning. Rigby says yeah, it wasn't even raining. Muscle Man says exactly, and that local TV dude's always come through. He's getting a second shipment today. The scene cuts to the front of the house. The doorbell rings and Mordecai opens the door. Jan introduces himself. Mordecai tells him to come in. Jan enters the house. Mordecai asks if this is it and if Jan will do the whole house. Rigby asks if it's for free. Jan says yes, the whole house for free. Rigby asks if they even have to tip him. Jan says nope, nothing like that, he promises. Mordecai says great. Jan asks if it's just the two of them here. Rigby says no, there's a bunch of people in and out of this place, asking if they should clear everyone out. Jan says no, that's fine, and he'll deal with them if he sees them. Mordecai says they have some important video games to play, so they'll leave Jan to it. Jan says okay, thank you sirs, and that he'll be done in no time. 3 hours later, Mordecai and Rigby are playing a video game that says game over. Rigby groans. Mordecai says let's take a break. Rigby says he can't feel his thumbs. Mordecai sighs and suggests checking to see if the wallpaper guy is done. He and Rigby open the door and see the wallpaper, which is a peculiar red and deep purple color. They say, "Whoa!" Rigby says, "Nice, and to check out this new wall shine." Mordecai says this is the best idea they've ever had. Rigby suggests checking out the rest of the house. Suddenly they hear Pops scream in terror. Mordecai and Rigby call for Pops. They rush to the staircase and see Jan putting up wallpaper over Pops. Pops says bad show repeatedly. Mordecai tells Jan to stop and asks what he's doing. Jan turns at them and hisses. He now has pointed teeth. He scampers up the walls and into the next room. Mordecai asks Pops if he's okay and what happened. He pulls down the wallpaper. Pops says he doesn't know, and that he was just heading to the kitchen when that man fell upon him. Rigby says this guy must be nuts. Mordecai says they have to get him out of here before Benson sees. A scream is heard. Mordecai and Rigby call for Benson. They turn a corner and enter the kitchen, but everything is covered in wallpaper leading off into darkness. Rigby asks what that guy did. Benson calls for help off screen. Mordecai says to come on, and they hurry down the hallway calling for Benson. They come to a point where the hallway splits up in different directions. Mordecai says come on, and they head down one of the paths. Mordecai realizes they've come to a dead end and says they have to go back. They race back to the junction point and head down another path. They come to a point where this path splits into two. Mordecai looks left, then right, then left again. He sees Jan scurry past, laughing wickedly. Mordecai yells, "Hey!" Benson calls for help off screen. Pops calls for Benson. Mordecai says, "Okay, Rigby and Pops go find Benson while he goes after the wallpaper man." Rigby tells Pops to come on. Mordecai is in pursuit of Jan, who is crawling along the ceiling. Mordecai yells for him to stop. Rigby calls for Benson. Pops says he doesn't like this at all. Rigby tells him to be quiet. They listen for a moment. Benson calls for help off screen. Rigby says they're coming and they hurry down the hall. Mordecai is still chasing Jan, who suddenly stops and straightens up at a dead end. The wall opens up and Jan runs through it. The wall closes up and curves to the left. Mordecai says, "Whoa!" Rigby says they must be getting close. Pops calls for Benson. Pops and Rigby suddenly bump into Mordecai. Mordecai reacts with confusion. Rigby says they're getting nowhere. Pops tells them to look and points at the wall. It opens up to reveal another passageway. Then the other walls box them in. Mordecai says he thinks it wants them to go this way and to come on. Pops says he thinks they're growing. Mordecai says no, the hall's getting smaller. He feels the wall saying it's an optical illusion and to go back. Pops gasps. Rigby says he can't stand small spaces. Mordecai tells him to calm down. Rigby says he needs air and can't breathe. Mordecai says he can breathe and not to panic. Rigby says he needs to get out of here and starts panicking. Mordecai tells him to stop. Rigby starts scratching at the walls and ends up ripping right through the wallpaper. Mordecai says, "Whoa!" Benson calls for help off-screen. Mordecai tells Benson to hold on and says, "Come on." The three of them start ripping through the wallpaper until they happen upon a cavern. Rigby asks if they're still in the house. Benson calls for help. Benson, Skips, Muscle Man, and a delivery guy are all wrapped up in wallpaper hanging from the ceiling. Rigby says, "Whoa." Mordecai asks if they're okay. Benson asks if they look okay and to hurry up and get them down. Rigby asks who that guy is. The delivery guy says he was just trying to deliver a package and doesn't want to die. He sobs. Mordecai says don't worry, they'll get them, but gets cut off. Jan suddenly jumps in front of them and hisses menacingly. Mordecai tells Jan to let their friends go and then get out of their house. Mordecai, Rigby, and Pops all gasp in horror as Jan reveals himself to be a gigantic spider. Jan grabs Pops, wraps him up in wallpaper silk, and hangs him from the ceiling. Mordecai and Rigby scream and start chucking rocks at Jan. They bounce right off of Jan and one hits Benson. Benson tells them to watch it. Jan shoots silk at Mordecai and Rigby, but they dodge. Mordecai chucks another rock at Jan's head, but he ducks, and it knocks Muscle Man down from the ceiling. Muscle Man escapes from the wrapping and says he's free. Jan stabs Muscle Man with his leg. Muscle Man says whatever, that didn't even hurt, and that if Jan's job was to kill people, he'd probably get fired. Jan lifts Muscle Man up into the air. Muscle Man tells Jan not to even think about eating him. Muscle Man lets out screaming cries as Jan swallows him in one gulp. Mordecai and Rigby call for Muscle Man. Benson asks what they're waiting for. Mordecai and Rigby continue throwing rocks. One of them breaks open Skip's wrappings and he falls and lands on his ankle, twisting it. Skips says his ankles. Pops is seen falling to the floor and lands on his arm, hurting it. Pops says his arm. Benson says, "Great rescue." Another rock breaks open Benson's wrappings, but he lands on both feet unharmed. He says, "They're going to kill them before that spider gets the chance." The delivery guy lands in Benson's arms. Mordecai says to come on, and that they have to get out of here. Benson says, no they don't, and that the two of them are staying here. Mordecai and Rigby ask what? Benson says they hired that thing, so they fire it. Mordecai and Rigby glance over at Jan, who growls. Rigby says, that spider's going to kill them. Benson says, not his problem. Mordecai and Rigby groan in frustration. Rigby says, okay, listen up, Jan. Jan steps forward. Rigby says he's fired. Rigby shrieks and dodges as Jan attempts to spear Rigby with his leg. Mordecai says that was a metaphor and they need to stay and destroy him. Rigby asks, what, really? Jan roars and causes rocks to fall from the ceiling. Several boulders land in front of the exit, blocking it. Rigby asks, now what? Mordecai says, Muscle Man's package. Rigby asks, what? Mordecai says he was expecting a package of grenades and tells Rigby to go get the box while he covers him. Mordecai throws rocks at Jan to distract him while Rigby goes for the package. Rigby grabs it, then rushes back to Mordecai. Rigby says he got it. Mordecai tells him to open it. Rigby says he can't get this stupid tape off. He tears the tape off and the package pops open. Jan suddenly grabs them both. Rigby says, great, and asks what the plan is now, adding, aren't these just replica grenades? Mordecai says no. Muscle Man said they were the real deal, remember? Rigby says, oh yeah. Mordecai tells him to quick, pull out all the pins. They pull some of the pins from the grenades. Jan moves them closer to his mouth. Mordecai says, special delivery. Rigby says, time to redecorate. Mordecai asks, wait, what? Rigby says, time to redecorate because of all the wall, but just tells Mordecai to throw it. They throw the package with the live grenades into Jan's mouth. They celebrate. Mordecai says, boom. Rigby says, eat it, Jan. They celebrate again. Rigby says, "Hey, hold on," and asks how far away they're supposed to be before these things go off. Mordecai asks, "Wait, what?" The scene cuts to outside, where Benson, Skips, Pops, and the delivery guy have made it out safely. Just then, the grenades go off and the house explodes, sending them all flying to the ground. Benson glances back up at the burning foundation. Benson says, "The end." Mordecai says that story was lame. Rigby says, "Yeah, Benson, they're not even that dumb." Benson says it's his story and he'll tell it how he wants. Rigby says, "Listen up, everyone. He's got a story about Benson." Benson says, "No, he doesn't. And no more stories." The tow truck guy says the party is just up ahead, Chief. Everyone cheers. Benson says, "See? Great! They're almost there." Rigby says, "Yeah, totally great. And that means there's enough time for him to tell the story about how dumb Benson is." Benson says, "No, there isn't, and story time is over." Rigby says once upon a time, Benson was so dumb. Benson says, "No stories." Rigby and Benson begin to fight. Everyone tries to stop them, but Rigby pushes Benson and accidentally bumps into the tow truck guy. The tow truck goes really fast and crashes into a tree. Everyone comes out of the house. Margaret asks if they're okay. Mordecai coughs and says, "Yeah, they're fine." He reacts with surprise. They show their bodies and they've become ghosts, like High Five Ghost. Mordecai asks what? And says, "They didn't survive the crash." Rigby says, he guesses not. Benson turns red and yells, "Unbelievable!" firing Rigby. Rigby slams Benson's hand and says he can't fire him because he's dead. He whoops and yells, "Party!" Everyone cheers and they enter the house. Benson is still outside. Benson grunts, asking why he even bothers. Skips asks if he's coming in. Benson grunts and says, "Yeah, he guesses." Benson goes inside the party. The camera goes up and shows the half moon, and the episode ends. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.